Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by just saying thank you for everybody bearing with us. Our incredible staff has been trying to work through some technical issues. You may have noticed that we have no video feed tonight. But rest assured, we have talked with our council and we will proceed. I want to thank everybody for joining us for tonight's Planning Policy Commission meeting. Tonight is the first of 3 public hearings we will be holding. So I'd like to begin by calling this meeting to order at 6:54 p.m. Stephen, before we go any farther, let's make it official. I believe we have a quorum.
Chair Voice, yes we do.
All right, excellent. And tonight, fortunately, we don't have any housekeeping, so we are just going to jump right in. We're going to start with public comments, general public comments. So for all of those who would like to speak, we ask that you speak clearly and pause frequently. Please state your name each time before you speak. And if you're attending virtually by computer or by phone and would like to speak during public comments, in addition to the above, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. You can use the call-in information in the meeting invite in the agenda packet to call in. Just a brief word about tonight's general public comments. We ask that for this portion of the meeting, please keep them general. You will have your time during the public hearing to speak about anything as far as Title 18 is concerned, but we want to make sure it gets on the record. So this portion of the meeting really is just for the good of the order, the good of the city. To get your comments as far as Title 18 on the record, please hold off until later this evening. Public comments are an important part. We take them seriously, and we do ask that you keep your comments for the public hearing, as well as these comments right now, to 5 minutes or less. Stephen, do we have anyone signed up who would like to make general public comments at this time?
Yes, Chair Voice, we have a few names listed for public comment, but I want to just check they want to speak to Title 18 or general comment. We have Kyler. Okay. And we have Hussein for Title 18. Okay. And then Brooke.
Yeah, we'll wait for Title 18.
Okay. And then Roberta, can you hear me? I've unmuted it if you can. Okay, we'll come back to Roberta. And that's all the hands I see.
Okay. Well, I guess we're going to jump right into the public hearing. So tonight, we are holding the first of 3 public hearings, as I mentioned, regarding the proposed Title 18 and Shoreline Master Program updates. Staff will be presenting and PPC will be deliberating policy questions, but tonight we are only concentrating on parts 1 through 4. During the comment period, again, the public may feel free to talk about any part of Title 18, all parts, and the Shoreline Master Program. But parts 5 through 8 will be presented and deliberated at next week's public hearing on January 26th. A representative from the Department of Ecology also will be here next week and can address any issues that come up tonight regarding the Shoreline Master Plan or anything else. Tonight, process-wise, staff will make a presentation. PPC will then ask clarifying questions. We will open the comment period towards the public. We'll close the public hearing for this evening, and then PPC will have the opportunity to deliberate amongst ourselves. So we will go ahead and open the public hearing at 6:57 p.m. Minnie, please go ahead and begin your presentation.
Good evening, commissioners, members of the community in our room here and those online. Again, like Chair said, we apologize for the delay and technical difficulties, but hopefully everyone can hear us now. I want to take a quick minute to introduce the folks from our team that are in the room. So we have our city attorney, Rachel Turpin, here with us. We have Christian Guys, our planning manager, and Stephen Padua, who's our long-range planning manager. And I wanted to correct something really quickly. The representative from Department of Ecology is here, Rebecca, in attendance. She will not be able to attend the meeting next Wednesday. So we'll capture a few things about the changes proposed in the Shoreline Master Program if you have any questions for Rebecca. The nuance with the Shoreline Master Program is that the City Council will adopt them, but the final approval is through Department of Ecology. So they're the final approving authority on our Shoreline Master Program. With that, I will share a quick presentation. Stephen, if you can make me, give me the sharing rights on my screen. Seems like you all can see it. So as you know, this is our big Title 18 and Shoreline Master Program amendments. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to hold the first of the public hearing. There are 2 additional public hearing nights coming up. The process, you've opened the public hearing, we'll give you a presentation, then there'll be clarifying questions from the commission, and then you'll take the public testimony on the items on Title 18 and Shoreline Master Program. You'll close the public hearing, and then you will deliberate on parts 1 through 4. So real quick to jive everyone's memory of what are the 4 different parts. The first part is called General Provisions, and what we've done in this particular part, we've consolidated and clarified the definitions that were in 5 different documents. We've deleted unnecessary definitions where we had sprinkled regulations with the definitions. We've put them in the regulations, and definitions are just the definitions. And then there's also a chapter for land use and comprehensive plan amendments. So we've clarified the process when public can seek those amendments. The part 2 is the procedures chapter. So some highlights, we have a new step-by-step process for permits. We have consolidated this pre-application community meetings. We used to have different kinds hosted by different entities, such as environmental neighborhood meeting by staff, but community collaboration by Development Commission. Now they're all called pre-application community meetings. And if the 2 were triggered, we used to deal with nuances like that. We've eliminated the administrative adjustment of standards, but there's a new process for deviations, but it's very specific things that you can ask for, and the criteria is more specific than more broad. We have a new review of levels of review table. There's a new process table. There are new site development permit thresholds. We also have added an interim early decision on technical reports to give folks an answer early on in the design process. New public notice procedures. We have a consolidated capital improvement projects permitting. There's a new chapter on development agreements. Then there are other things like developer obligations that were in the Central Issaquah vision document, and then Talus and Highland zoning cap. So we've streamlined some of those in this piece. Then we have this division of land. So there are new design standards. There's a process called unit lot subdivision, and the basic intent of that is not to change anything what the zoning already allows, but it's really meant for fee simple ownership. So you could do a condo development or an attached townhomes where you're jointly owning it in a condo style of ownership. With the unit lot subdivision, the same development, you actually own a piece of land with your home on it. So it's easier to get financing and other things that we've learned, but that's a process that didn't exist in the code. We've increased our thresholds for short plats from 4 to 9. And then the final plat, which is really a technical check of things that have already occurred. Did they build the road per standards that were approved through the public hearing? So that's an administrative process now with the idea that it would streamline redundant processes. The timing and expiration It's more clarity. It's not open-ended extensions forever. It's aligned with the state law and all that. So part 4 is the zoning. So it's what's your property zoned as, which then factors into what are the permitted uses in that chapter, in that zone. We had all different use tables. Central had standards. Then we had, all these different use tables. Those have all been consolidated and reformatted. We've added the descriptions for the zone. And then as far as some standards, we've added some clarification and graphics. Staff spent a lot of time figuring out which is your front, rear, and side setbacks. There's a clear guidance that should help staff as well as anyone wanting to do, any project within the city. And then I think we got some questions from some commission members about zero lot line development. So just as a refresher, what is zero lot line? It's really allowing a better use of your side yard setback. So in this graphic, you see that the house is set up on one end of the lot as opposed to in the middle with 2 5-yard setbacks. You get one 10-foot setback, which for smaller lots could mean a lot. It becomes a more usable space than having 2 just very narrow 5-foot side setbacks. So this is only allowed where single-family detached type of housing is allowed. And we have had many conversations with you over this topic, but it's basically allows a detached single-family residence sharing a common street to shift to one side of the lot. It doesn't change minimum lot size or any other zoning regulations. Generally preferred for small lot, single-family. Nobody does this for larger lots. It's different than an attached townhouse type of development, which is the unit lot subdivision that we just talked about. The previous policy recommendations, we went to council, they sent us back to you, and what we walked out getting direction from you was to allow these in Central, Highlands, Talus, and any single-family zone that have a minimum density of 7.26 dwelling units per acre. So that's where zero lot lines are permitted. And so then now we're going to launch into, so that's a very quick synopsis of highlights of the changes in these 4 parts and some of the questions that we got from you all. So we shared the policy questions with you last time, and we've picked the ones that apply to part 1 through 4. So question number 1 was, what's the site-specific rezone process look like for the city? So the 3 options were, and our recommended option was that the open record public hearing is with the hearing examiner and the city council makes the final decision. There are 2 other options where it comes to PPC and then you make the recommendation to city council, or the city council holds up open record public hearing under the 3rd options. We shared some pros and cons last time. Then the question number 2 was, we've cleaned up the approval criteria. This came to light based on the recent rezone that you all deliberated on, but also in general, making it more consistent and meeting the policy guidance for the city and comprehensive plan policy guidance. So we're asking if you have any other edits to these approval criteria. The 3rd question was on the deviations. We have assembled all these deviation criteria in one when we shared the policy question for you. Just checking in to see if you agree that this covers all the flexibility that we need to provide that can be administratively made decisions on. Every property owner has a right to apply for a variance, and that's a separate public hearing process, but these are smaller deviations and with very specific criteria as opposed to more vague and broad criteria under the administrative adjustment of standards. So we've listed here some of the deviations. There are a total of 9 that are sprinkled throughout all the chapters. And then through the public comments that we've received, we highlighted a few things in the comment matrix that you can decide if those are things you want to add to your policy discussion. and they relate to a technical document review. There was a concern about public utility exemptions, master site plans, non-conforming chapter, and site development permit thresholds. And I'll quickly go through all 5 of these for you. So the first one is a technical document review. So what we've put in the code is that you don't have to wait till everything is in front of Development Commission to find out what's the category of wetland on your property and which buffers apply. That you can do that kind of review and submittal earlier during your review process, and the city can then issue an actual decision that can be appealable to the hearing examiner early on, so you know what to design your project for. Currently, it's listed as a level 1 decision in the review tables, but there is an option you could make it level 2, which is also administrative. Both level 1 and level 2 are appealable to the hearing examiner. Level 2 will actually require a public notice. In some cases, that makes sense. You know, if you have a larger thing that's going to go to a development commission, we would do the public notice anyways. If a project triggers SEPA, we would do the public notice anyways. If you just need a building permit and you want to know your steep slopes, what are those and what your buffers are, and under the code today, we don't do a public notice requirement for those. So that's why we put that as a level 1. And if the underlying action requires a public notice, it would automatically go to. But it's not, you know, too much of a difference for us. If you think it should be a level 2, we can make that change. The other one, I think, is a public agency utility exemption. Currently, it's listed as a level 1, but you can decide if you want to make it a level 2. And then there's this discussion about the master site plan. So just for new members, the master site plan is a process that exists in our existing code, and it was generally used for larger projects that were over 15 acres or more. School district got its master site plan approval. Tibbetts Valley Park, many years ago, had a master site plan approval that was issued for it. At City Council's request, who did not want to be a decision maker for quasi-judicial matters, we have removed them, because it used to be going to Development Commission, who would make a recommendation to Council, and then Council couldn't talk to community members, but they actually were making the decision. So there were some issues with that process. And so we've eliminated the master site plan approval, which is just now a level 4 site development permit. There was also a criteria, what is considered a minor modification versus a major modification, and it was very broad. Substantive changes and not substantive changes. It depended on the person making the decision. You could come to a different conclusion on what those changes were. So in order to provide some predictability in decision-making, the threshold of 10% was selected to say if you have 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, you could add 100 square feet more to it, and it would be considered a minor modification. You still have to comply with all the code criteria, and you still are subject to the same approval criteria, but the process for reviewing it is administrative versus going back to Development Commission for it. But it's not, there was some confusion, I think, in terms of what does 10% mean. It doesn't mean 10% of your entire site. It just means what was approved before. Minor adjustments within 10% would be administrative. And so you still have to meet your setbacks and your buffer requirements. So the policy questions, if you want to add these to your list, would be, do you need to add any additional changes to this criteria for major versus minor? We've kept the intent, building, impervious surface, landscaping, all those things. We're just defined what is minor versus major to be 10%. The other, I think, concern we've heard is that master site plan was used for larger properties which generally have a need to phase their project out. So if you think we need to add another criteria that properties over 15 acres can request a phasing that can be approved by the Development Commission, we can add that line back in the code. There were some general comments about the non-conforming chapter. We have not made any policy changes to the non-conforming chapter, but this is an important chapter because it applies to existing businesses, existing folks that are in the city. You've seen some comments that came in via email today from Lakeside, primarily related to critical aquifer recharge area. And that chapter, we've added some prohibited uses within drinking water, within the well protection wellheads for the protection of water, drinking water supplies. So there's some comments related to that. But the general premise of this chapter has not changed. It's been clarified what's allowed and not allowed for those thresholds. But if you want to get into more specifics, details, if you have more questions, we can do that. And lastly, there's been, we wanted to bring to your attention the redevelopment definition, which is an addition, alteration, repair where the construction cost is more than 50% of the assessed value within a 3-year period. So what where that comes into play is the thresholds for site development permit. And generally, when you're looking at site development permit, you're looking at what's the impact to the parking, how are you changing height, the site design aspects of it. If you're doing an interior tenant improvement, regardless of the cost of the project, it's all inside. And so that really doesn't change or doesn't add any value to put them through a site development permit, unless there's parking changes and other things, which then it's no longer a site, an interior remodel. So just wanted to flag that if there are any changes that you feel need to explicitly clarify that interior improvements, regardless of the improvement of the value, a site development permit is not required. So that pretty much concludes our presentation. And if you have any questions, I can bring that particular topic up.
Did we want to, yeah, I guess we could stop here and take clarifying questions and then go on to the Shoreline Master Plan. So, commissioners, you have any questions?
Minnie, I'm sorry, that went really quickly, and thank you for going quickly over the things we already understand. But the one that I don't understand that very well is the help me, the lot line, not the 0 lot line, the other one.
Unit lot subdivision?
Unit lot subdivision.
Okay.
Can you just do that one more time for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
So what a unit lot subdivision means is if you have 5 townhomes in a row attached that the zoning already allows, you can create your main parent lot, and then you have these children lots that are 15 feet wide. So the standards of, your buffers and setbacks and things don't apply to that unit lot, they apply to your parent lot. But it allows someone to transfer ownership for that little sliver of land with the building that their townhome is situated on. So it doesn't, or alternatively, the builder would build a 5-lot townhome, and the way the sales occur would be it's a condo-style ownership. You own the land in condo-style ownership, and you just own your building above it. So each of those unit 15-foot or whatever wide, your townhome sits on becomes a unit lot subdivision. So it doesn't change its zoning. It doesn't change where townhomes are allowed or not allowed. That's under the zoning permitted uses table.
Thank you, that helps a little bit. I still don't know what the parent lot is, and is there something on the parent lot? What is the parent lot?
Yeah, so the parent lot would include an access easement, or, if there's a row of guest parking, or if there's an open space tract. So you would have your 1-acre lot that could have all your landscapings, your common tracts, your utilities may be on it, but then you have your individual lots within that parent lot.
And so the parent lot persists, and so you're not subdividing the whole lot as per the density that's allowed per lot.
you would still need to meet your density requirements for the parent lot. So sometimes you have requirements that say, 5-foot side yard setback. So that won't apply to your individual townhouse home lot. That would apply to your overall lot.
This is all very interesting. And then I have another question after that. Thank you. That's about as far as my brain can go on that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Milligan. And I'm a big believer in constructive criticism, and some was provided to me. So I am going to ask commissioners that you flag me so I can call you in, rather than just having a free-for-all where people are just speaking. That way I can actually say, Commissioner Patterson, Commissioner Lewis, because last week it was pointed out to me that people are talking. Sometimes people forget to introduce themselves when they're speaking. So I would ask that you guys wave me down and let me bring you in. Thank you. More questions? Commissioner Milligan.
So about zero lot lines. I understand this is under a chapter heading that's zero lot line. It's not a chapter about setbacks, and that's where maybe I'm getting confused. Can you review that one a little bit more for me again?
Sure. So you would, this would come under as a plat. So you can't have one house when in a neighborhood, everything else is developed around it, and say, I want a zero lot line. I want to put my house at the edge of this corner, because it's not approved as a zero lot line development. So that's why it's in the platting section, because when you come in with a new plat, this would be a tool for you to plat it accordingly.
And so then it's not, my neighbor can't do that, put their house right on my property line. And then the perimeters of this kind of plat, how is the setback on the exterior perimeters handled when you get to the one end and then there's another property outside the...
Yeah, so it would have to meet all the fire code regulations, which typically aren't, from structure to structure. We would look at it, the entire thing, and the edges would have to kind of meet that. So if there's a corner lot, you would shift it towards the corner. So there would be some evaluation of what makes most sense on that without impacting adjacent properties.
Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you. Minnie, can you remind me, on that vein, you had mentioned in the policy question about where this would apply to, and you were saying that for the density, you had a specific thing. Do you have an overlay for us or a map that actually shows us where in the city? That was one thing that I was a little bit confused about, was kind of to say which size plats can actually apply to be able to do this. Because when we originally talked about this, we had some serious issues about neighborhood character and where we were going to put it into the city. And I'm trying to have the recollection of where we had discussed, and in the policy question, it looked rather vague, pretty broad, I mean to say, of where it can go.
Yeah, so I think the last when we discussed, we would share the zoning map. We can see if we can pull it up now, but it was the Highlands, Talus, Central, and any property zoned single-family small lot.
Right, so that's that last one, I guess, is where I'm trying to
Where,
understand.
which properties are zoned single-family small lot?
And that would be able to then do that.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull up a zoning map on the screen here.
So that's one of my questions that has to kind of, how do we fine tune the lens that we're looking at for this planning tool of where it's gonna go?
Okay, so let's try this. I don't know if this will be useful, but I can share my screen. So you all can see the screen. So it's this olive green colored area. So South Cove up in the, slightly below on the north side, north part of the city. Those are all single-family small lots. which is 7.26 dwelling units per acre. Does that help?
I'm curious, so when I had spoken with staff, with Stephen about this, I've been following council's recommendation to PPC about this, and their feelings about it. I'm curious if it's an option for us to consider reducing where we put it in and see how it goes, right? We would drastically change the nature of South Cove with this. And so by saying, let's see how this looks in Central, where we want to be using it as a tool for micro-housing to be able to be gaining a type of housing that we don't have. If we want to be using this in more of a specific tool to see how it ends up playing out. Is that an option that's before us?
There's always an option of what, if you want to change your recommendation, but before, when we asked this policy commission by consensus, that was the recommendation. So,
And it's one that right now the administration feels is the right breadth for the tool?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any other follow-up clarifying questions in regards to parts 1 through 4? I just had 2 questions. So Commissioner Voice, if someone performs a geotechnical report, coal mine hazard report, critical areas report, landslide traffic, stormwater report, and let's say the applicant backs out or falls through, does the city do anything with those? Does the city keep them for records or?
Good question. I don't know what our current practice has been. I think there's some value for the soils report because geology doesn't change over a long period of time. I know Department of Ecology at one time was asking all the jurisdictions, do you guys have these records? We want to create a RIP, because as new development occurs, anything that's comes to the city as a public record, we follow our public records, guidance if a retention schedule. So if the project never went through, if the guidance from the state is we can, not keep it, then we don't keep it. We don't have to keep it, but, so.
I think it would have some level of retention. Hi, Rachel Turpin, City Attorney. I believe it would have lower retention than a project that came to fruition, but I would believe it would have some level of retention. I'm interested in that question, so I'm going to look at the retention schedule right now and find out.
Great, thank you. And then just one other question. This is kind of a general question, but as we see this code continue to go through, I know some of the feedback we got tonight will be about, and probably going to hear about, is non-conforming uses. A lot of our city structures are quite old. So that's, I would imagine, is going to put quite a few areas into non-conformance. Do we have any idea of how much, or any idea at all? I mean, again, I can look around the city and look at structures that are 30, 40 years old all day long.
Are you talking about a specific regulation or?
Well, just as far as what we're doing with the non-conforming uses. So how much of our city is going to actually be affected by the code? How much of it gets grandfathered in?
So the uses haven't changed. We haven't changed the uses in any other, with this code update. We are allowing where things were previously allowed. The only thing that has changed as far as uses go is in the critical aquifer recharge area, we have added a prohibited uses list.
Okay.
And so that particular uses, how many of those uses exist in the city?
Sure.
There may be some, but we don't have a large list of those prohibited uses.
Right, I'm just thinking about older structures that want to do additions, things like that. Then they have to start paying attention to those percentages, things like that if they want to, because again, a lot of the structures in this city are quite old.
Yeah, none of that thresholds have changed, so,
That stays the same as in the code that we're using now.
Correct. So existing to propose the thresholds for, if your place burns down, and you can rebuild your house.
I'm thinking of the Egg and Us. I used to
yes.
love that place.
Yes, so even though it was in the stream buffer, but because it was an accident, it was a not voluntary kind of a thing, There's time limits on you, just because that happens, you can't have that open-ended. It's, you know,
Sure.
within certain time period, you're allowed. Those are people's grandfather's rights.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Minnie. Commissioner Lewis?
Thank you. I have a question, something that we kind of glossed over in parts 1 and 2 is we have some changes that have happened in definitions. And I spoke with staff earlier today, and I thank Christian and Stephen for their time, that I have some concerns right now about definitions. And for anybody who has slogged through the definitions, I would suspect that you've also found some concerns. We talked last meeting, Minnie, about kind of the review process of kind of how things get cleaned up. But when it's larger than a cleanup, right? When it's larger than a typo and a reference to somewhere else in a document, and it's more of a structural change. This commission has not actually discussed definitions, and I'm curious when that is an appropriate time. If you'd rather discuss definitions when we talk about it, for instance, if we want to talk about the definitions of hazard trees, various tree definitions, when we're actually discussing tree code, if you'd like to do definitions in this part because it's part 1. But I'm curious, what is the right time for this commission to really kind of more get into the weeds about this very important section?
I mean, the definitions have been shared with the commission, so my recommendation on that would be, let's pick the ones that are concerned, and then, you know, have a conversation about them, what your concern is. But like I said before, the extent of the changes, the definitions were more of a cleanup issue. The regulations are not part of the definitions. They're important from a legal perspective of how it's defined and how they're used, and so that's been the focus with the definitions, to not define common terms, not define things that are only occur once in your code, and such. So if did you guys discuss a specific issue with the definitions, or I'd like Christian to answer anything specific if you have about, I'm not sure your extent of your conversation this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, we can go through specific examples if you want to clarify, you know, the intent, and clean up any questions that you have.
So would you guys like to do definitions tonight with section 1, or would you like to do definitions as we get to the most applicable parts of code? An example would be hazard trees is a good example of something that has changed drastically from our last draft and from the original code, right? And it's something that we've discussed as a commission about things like having staff, having a recommendation to council to budget for an arborist on staff to designate hazard trees. It's been a lot of layered discussions, right? And right now in the current definitions, I find it to be lacking for our purposes. Would you rather talk about that tonight or when we actually talk about trees? You know, does that make sense? Like, we don't need to have a larger discussion if you guys would like to piece it out bit by bit. But this commission has yet to talk about discussions in a public forum. Thank you. Definitions.
Sure. I mean, if you'd rather talk about it when we're talking about the substance, you can do that, but we're prepared to answer any questions you have on the definitions tonight.
Chair Voice, let me step in here real quickly. How much of the public commentary have you gotten on definitions?
From a 40,000 community members.
Yeah, ballpark.
You know, folks have raised some good points, and we've tried to clean up as we've heard. So we're willing to take a look at that, but I don't know if you have the time in this meeting to go word by word over one definition. So if you have, please send an email and we can clean up if there's some questions. But
I think
yeah.
that's my point, is like I said, we have 3 public hearings with a lot of policy-driven discussions. I don't think it's, to Commissioner Lewis's point, I think if there's a particular definition while we're talking about a particular subject, I think let's have it. But if it's just to go through blanketly, I think we want to send those to staff through emails. I don't think I mean, 3 meetings, we're not going to have time to go through, I don't even know how many definitions there are. I think that's probably easier for you guys, I would imagine. And possibly what we can do is on the 3rd public hearing, if there are still definitions that are problematic, we can bring them up. The 3rd public hearing really is basically a capturing of what we're going to be doing over the next 2 well, like tonight and next Thursday, and then we're going to basically be able to give our recommendations. So if there are definitions that are of concern to you guys tonight and next Thursday, let's bring them up. But otherwise, if they're minute, let's just send those to staff. Because again, we've got a pretty packed next 3 evenings. And I want to thank staff for providing those 3 evenings, so. Are there any further clarifying questions from the commission? Commissioner Lewis?
I have a question about variances, and while I have the space, I will say that I think that when it comes up, our definition right now of open space needs to be defined. It's something that I think is a larger discussion for this commission, and that I have sent staff my comments as I assumed my chair would want me to do, but I do think that there are larger discussions right now that are pretty open-ended. I think trees and open space are ones that need to be further addressed by this commission and by staff. Variances, is there, can we limit a number of variations? Are we able to tell an applicant, here's your choice? I'm talking about, sorry, deviations, thank you very much. For a request for a deviation, are we able to limit that to an applicant? Here's your bucket of choices and you're allowed to pick 2, no more.
You know, if there's, with this code change of not having the AASs, I think that will automatically happen. I think what you're referring to is people had the choice of asking for an administrative adjustment of standards, which was so broad that people could ask for 10, they could ask for 20 or 5 or whatever, right? So I think because we are already limiting it to these are the 9 things you can ask for, and if there's a legitimate reason for someone to protect a strand of trees and avoid that, and we want to make that happen, then perhaps you're not going to get arbitrarily picking a number saying you only get 5 and not 4. There may be so I think your focus shouldn't, your worry shouldn't be how many we would grant out, because I think that'll get ratcheted down anyways because of the way the process is set up differently. It's more about whether these 9 make sense, or do you want to have individually or cumulatively?
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say that I have concerns about the 9th, which is forested hillside preservation. We've talked a lot about issues with fill and cuts. We've talked a lot about retaining walls. At this point, I would strike number 9 completely. I'm looking at page 83 of the code, not in the packet, but of the code, when looking at section 18, 202.080, deviations from standards generally. And I'm a little confused, and I wanted staff to talk a little bit about these 9, and some of them seem like they're ones that have specifically been discussed that we don't want, and yet we have a deviation that's allowing for it.
Do you want me to respond, or is
Yeah,
it a question?
Please,
Okay.
yeah, the question, yeah.
Let me try and get to the section of the code that,
83.
Chair Voice.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. I'd like to amplify Commissioner Lewis's, or maybe clarify what I think she might be trying to get at is, how did these get on this list? Might be one way of saying, how did this list get determined? And I think that Commissioner Lewis is saying, especially things that were so important to us in our standards, how would such a thing get on this list? It seems, we don't know why these things would have deviations allowed. I think I heard somewhere that it was because these are things that are often asked for, but there must be another reason.
sure, I think there's a balancing act of flexibility when it leads to a better outcome for everyone involved, for not just for the applicant or the community, but it makes logical sense to do this way, but the code is so you only can do it this way. So there needs to be that balance of flexibility yet predictability, which was missing from the AASs, because we could never give people an answer and predictable, this is what you can do. Maybe, but that didn't really. So this is an attempt at providing that predictability, but yet keeping some of that flexibility in situations where it makes sense. Some of those are carryover from, those weren't AASs, but those were specific things that the existing code already allowed those deviations. So there's a lot of legislative history for some of these. The forested hillside chapter, I did pull it up, that was included in the last packet. And it's really, this is a new chapter, and these deviations are minimal because it's, maybe if I can share my screen, you all can look at it rather than me reading them loud. Okay. Is it legible on your screens? So from the forested hillside, you can request for these. Fill and cut limits may request a deviation of 10 feet and under. So it's not huge cut and fill, but 10 feet and under if the existing grade is unnatural. For multifamily, mixed, and non-residential buildings, additional cut as supported by the applicant's geotech engineer may be permitted if you need an elevator shaft. So, really thinking about some practical applications because you have to go down below the ground for those elevator shafts. And do we really want to prevent that and have some more fill put up? So that's sort of the justification for that one. And the criteria really is you still have to show that you're keeping the disturbance to a minimum. You're demonstrating that you're minimizing your truck traffic and stormwater and runoff isn't impacted. And it's not a huge eyesore. And so some examples for elevator shaft that was shown in here are some practical applications of when some of these things, if they are, this is how you're going to do it, can be problematic. Number 2 was the distance between the retaining walls may be reduced if the applicant can demonstrate that the change would increase tree protection and preservation. So there's a tie-in. If you're trying to save a tree and just, keep your retaining wall a little further away, then we'll grant you a deviation, not just because you're trying to squeeze in more or what, So there's a specific criteria for that. The third one, we say when streets have limited right-of-way, the applicant may request a deviation for a retaining wall. And, sometimes if you have that chase the hillside for a retaining wall, you're going to clear cut all your hillside. So just trying to have some flexibility where we can make some of those decisions yet meet the intent of what we're trying to do with this forested hillside. That's sort of the context of why it was produced.
So as we move away from the adjustment of administrative standards and we start to have this criteria where the intent is to be able to have more flexibility, to be able to have the code interworking together. But when the decision maker doesn't have to adhere to any kind of daylight right now, there's really no provision for the public to have more awareness of these deviations. So it kind of mimics the AASs in a similar way, because with level 1 and 2, there's no role for the public. So right now, though we've limited and we've defined and we're linking in the code, right? These are awesome progress moves from where we've been at. I'm not seeing where there's anything that says when you apply for a variance, this is the way for the public to be able to weigh in on these things. I'm not seeing anything that says, hey, you need to fit these particular categories. Right now, it's all still up to the director to be able to deem if it is or isn't without any kind of review, as I'm reading it.
Okay, is it level 2? Yeah, it's a level 2 decision, so deviations are a level 2 that require a public notice.
Level 2 has but there's no public hearing, right?
Correct. You can't
Right.
have a public hearing on every project. I mean, then it becomes a variance. A variance requires a public hearing. These are smaller things with very specific criteria that is being debated publicly, and the policymakers are agreeing to, yes, if you're saving trees, you can have less distance between your retaining walls. So by having more public process at that end, won't bring any more value to it. It's just will slow the process down with the same outcome.
Would you find that a tracking mechanism would be helpful for the public to be able to say how often we're having deviations from standards happening, so that there's a way to have an avenue for public awareness of how many times, for instance, 1 through 9 is happening?
We can run a report on the deviations issued in the year, absolutely.
Okay. I think that's what I'm trying to figure out right now, is I'm not understanding how we get the kind of the last mile. We've done a lot of work to get away from the AASs, which has been really a lot of progress, but a lot of the deviations I'm seeing here are ones that we've specifically said, but these are things we don't want. So it may be this back and forth and a give and take, but we may also be getting things that we're not wanting. And how do we have an awareness of them so that we can then make changes and modifications?
No, I understand the concern is because of the legacy of, the perception that these were handed like candy and they weren't, there wasn't any accountability, but they were also very vague and arbitrary criteria, so different people could come to different conclusions on that. So I think that in itself will solve the concern that you have, but if it brings some transparency to how many of these were issued, we can absolutely, create a report from our permitting system.
Thank you, Minnie.
I want to thank Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Milligan to getting that to a question. So we've got a lot of time to deliberate, but do we have any other clarifying questions from the commission? Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you. Hopefully this is a rather quick one. Looking at policy question 2 regarding the approval criteria for the site-specific rezones, wanted to ask on the first criteria, reads out, the rezone demonstrates a public benefit and enhances public health, safety, and welfare. For my clarification, can you help me understand how that's evaluated?
Yeah, this is a pretty general thing that you'll see in a lot of cities. I don't know if there's a legal term of evaluating public benefit, health, and safety. Obviously, we won't, approve something that endangers public health, safety, but it is broad. But I don't know, Rachel, do you want to help answer that question? Yeah, it is, correct.
Hello again, Rachel Turpin. I do think it's a very broad and kind of vague criteria, to be quite honest. There are many cases that do discuss what the health and welfare are. Like Minnie said, it is a legal term of art, so I do think it is something that you can define and you can actually put your finger on, but it is tricky. So I do think that it's not a criteria that I would be sad to see go. I do think that it is one that is difficult to deal with in practicality.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. And just to add a little bit of context is, that's kind of why I was asking, is because looking at the rest of these, being a quasi-judicial manner, seems like there's a lot more like it has or hasn't, or it does or does meet certain criteria, whereas that one seems a little bit more broad, especially looking at it from a legal lens, right?
It's very squishy.
Yeah, and if we were to go in that more it is a quasi-judicial process, then I would anticipate the criteria should kind of line up from a legal perspective to be a little bit more clearly defined.
It would certainly be nice to get policy direction on what that means, I guess, what the policymakers see as providing that benefit or that detriment, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Is there anyone else who has a clarifying question? Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. This is about these the public hearings going to a hearing examiner, is there an assumption of the operating hours of the hearing examiner if we have them holding public hearings? Currently, we hold public hearings after work when it's convenient for the public to attend. How has it happened with a hearing examiner?
Yeah, so our contract with them can stipulate that evening meeting. So I think depending on the nature of the project and the amount of community interest, or, simple things like an appeal goes to them when it's only the appellant and the hearing examiner, those things probably don't need to be scheduled in the evening, or there's a code enforcement appeal or something like that. But for general land use applications and decisions, we can work on, those can be in the evenings. There's no requirement that the hearing examiner has to hold them just during the day work hours.
And thank you. And then I have possibly the final lighthearted question. On page 124 of 946, 18.216.030, section C. I'll let you get there. I thought that's one of our policy questions. Is that a little bit of a cart before the horse thing?
I'm still trying to get to. Did you get to it? What happened to my?
That one has to do with the site-specific rezones, and it goes to the hearing examiner.
Oh, yeah. So that helps.
Lighthearted,
I don't have to
yeah.
get to the section then. Yes, so when administration had a recommendation, we didn't put blanks in the draft. So administration's recommendation is in the draft, you'll see, but we flagged that for policy discussion, and we can change it. Based
No,
on
I
what-
just thought it was funny. Like I said, just
Yeah.
a lighthearted question, that's all. Okay. Do we have any other clarifying questions? Going once, going twice? All right. I now would like to open the floor for public comments concerning Title 18. So Stephen, if you could list off who signed up first, we'll get going. I do ask that people keep their comments to 5 minutes or less. Thank you.
Yes, Chair Voice, we have Kyler.
Okay, whoa. I'm Kyler Danielson, I'm with Lakeside Industries. Thank you for all of your hard work on this. I've been following it for quite a while. It's a lot, and you've put a lot of time and effort into it. We submitted a letter today about some of the changes that are proposed for this particular meeting in the section. So I'm just gonna summarize those really quickly. The first is the process concerns. There are some extensive policy changes in this packet, the 707 pages of it. And we're hopeful that we can maybe spend more time on some of those. We didn't feel like there was, like everything has really been addressed in the public sphere. There have been a lot of large changes with a short deadline. And we are concerned about transparency. I know Commissioner Lewis mentioned the definition section. The meeting that was specifically brought up to discuss definitions, there was no discussion of definitions, and there hasn't been a red line or anything on definitions. So that's one example of a few other things that have been changed without really providing information about those changes. We also had some substantive comments. I know that Minnie brought up our concern about non-conforming uses. The biggest issue there that I have and that Lakeside has is we want to be able to improve our operations. We want to be able to change with the environmental improvements and the advancements in technology, and becoming a non-conforming use can make that very difficult or impossible. And so we hope that the commission will consider the impact of that and read our comment. So, thank you.
Next, we have Hussein.
Okay, there we go. Hi, my name is Hossein Koram. I'm a East Side developer, multifamily. I've been here before. I see some new faces. Thank you for having me, Chairman Voice, commissioners, lovely staff. Honor for me to be here. I'm here to talk about the vesting relating to the Title 18 here. I started the project at 2018 and been working on it since then. With the code changes that I've learned roughly about 6 months ago, we rushed in to turn in for the building permit, which we did just last for the 65-unit apartment complex, which we just did November. And I'll tell you, the building permit, I brought some examples so you know. Our submittal was roughly about 1,000 pages of text this size, all electronic though, so a lot had changed. And we had 324 pages of plans, which is basically, this is like a couple of sheets. 324 would be roughly about that size. So there's a very high level of threshold for your building permit to be accepted. And we made some mistakes that didn't happen. So we were resubmitting later this month, and hopefully we get accepted. But what I'm here before you is this, that I know the last time the commissioners were not keen on making a recommendation to the council as far as vesting for the building permit. There were disagreements. But I hope that you consider that this time, that once a project spend $1 million on consultant fees and all kinds of things and go through this elaborate process, a code change, it could be dramatic. And as early as we try to get it in, what if we turn it in and then there's another mistake and they kick it back? Each revision takes 2 to 6 months, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So it's very difficult, very scary, and you have $1 million or more on the line. So I hope you consider this. I think we're gonna make it this time. The staff are helping, doing a good job. But the point I'm trying to make is it's scary. And if I have to do it again, we're gonna provide public service, we're making new housing. Then you, as a developer, I would consider that what happened to me the last time. Would I want to put myself at risk again? Do I want to invest in Issaquah and build more housing? So these are the things that I urge you to consider, be compassionate, and hopefully I would not need it, but I urge you to vote for vesting to be embedded with submittal of the building permit, not necessarily being accepted. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Brooke.
Good evening, Planning and Policy Commission. I was here last week, and so we have some updates and clarification on what we were doing. I may not be able to be here next week. I know this is 1 through 4, but you can make comments at any time. But then as I'm realizing there's some respect for what I'm saying that has to actually do with, I think, 1 through 4 anyway. As you know, for anyone that's listening or online or listen to this later, this started back in April in the process. So your Title 18 has been out a long, long time. There's been tons of public notice. I know lots of people that know this is going on. And so this particular item that I'm speaking about, that I spoke about last week, could just remind everybody that's online or hasn't seen before, these comments were made back in April, May timeframe. So they know the item that I'm speaking about here in the ADU, which we're going to tie in to relate to lot size, has been out in the public for a long time. So this is kind of a small item really that we're talking about, that we go from 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. It's only 200 square feet more. So this is not a giant item that we see that should not be handled in this process here, like its own 2-year separate process, because we're only talking about 200 square feet, and we think that the solution here can definitely easily be handled within this Title 18 redo that you are all working on here. Let's see. So We clarified last week that, the size we were looking at that we're talking about is only 1,200 square feet, not 1,000 square feet that it is today under Title 18. And that, many, many cities don't have the exact percentage, but certainly I think people would call 1,200 square feet as a maximum standard for an ADU is one of the standards that's used around the country in cities, and we're currently at 1,000 square feet. And as we said last time, and I just want to reiterate again for people who weren't here, that the goal of moving this to 1,200 is the idea that people can stay in their properties. We gave the example of elderly couple, you need separate bedrooms, separate bathrooms, and 24-hour nursing care, which could even be a third bathroom, and then going maybe from one house to another and to continue the life that they currently leave, but for reasons to be able to stay on their property, they need to be in an ADU to make that happen. And so that's one example, and I'm sure many people would have other examples about why they may think that 1,200 square feet is better to go to. So speaking tonight that what we're looking at on this current lot size, we did some work with the city of Issaquah, and many of you probably know, which I think is some relevant to today through 144, is the city has 4 essentially lot sizes in the single family where we're talking about. We're not talking about commercial. You don't put an ADU on a commercial property, I don't think. But so the sizes today that are in the city, which I don't think anybody's talking about changing these sizes, is 6,000 square feet, 9,600 square feet, 3,500 square feet, and 5 acres. And for anybody listening, an acre is, 43,560 square feet. So it gives you an idea of the size. So we looked at this and we said, what probably makes sense for the city of Issaquah is if somebody feels they can stay in their property, if they have a 1,200 ADU, simply another 200 square feet, maybe we require that the lot size is larger. So if the Planning Policy Commission is taking notes, I'll just give you 4 numbers here. That is the suggestion, and interested in what everyone thinks when you start talking about this. And that is, I started out and keeping some idea of the size relevance the same. So a 1 to 10 ratio. And the 1 to 10 ratio, the first number to write down is 2,000 more square feet. So the smallest is probably the biggest one that your Planning Policy Commission will talk about. The smallest lot size in the city of Issaquah is 6,000 square feet. You can have 1,000 square foot ADU on it. So if someone wants to go that extra 200 square feet so that they can stay in their property, then their property size would need to be 8,000 instead of 6,000. So 200 to 2,000 is a 1 to 10 bump. So the number I'd like you to write down is, a 2,000 square feet more on the property size. Now on the 9,600, in order to keep things the same relative scale that the city currently has today, is my number to you is 3,000. So instead of 9,600, you'd have to go up to 12,600 if you wanted to be over the 1,000. And so we keep it nice and simple. It's just, if you got a 6,000 square foot zoning area, to go 1 square foot over 1,000, then you got to have, the 8,000, the extra 2,000. If you're in the 9,600 and you want to go 1 square foot over 1,000, then you got to have 12,600. And so the scales are kind of the same. So the third number I'll give you is 5,000. So if you're in the 35,000 square foot lot size, then you got to go to 40,000 square foot. And you can see it starts to get a little bit random and like, who cares at 35,000 square feet? And then I just thought, well, if you're at 5 acres, you got to go to 6 acres.
Hi, Brooke. So your 5-minute timer has gone off. Could you wrap up, please?
Yeah, I can wrap up. So I think you see the numbers. The number is 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, and an acre over above your lot sizes if you want to use that extra 200 square feet to match what many other cities are at. Thank you. I look forward to hearing what the Planning Policy Commission thinks about that and us working so that people can stay on their properties. Thank you very much.
Chair Voice, we don't have anybody signed up, but just checking the room to see if there's anybody else. Connie, come on up.
Okay, my name's Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk. So I'm going to pop straight in with no particular further introduction. So the technical review. If you look at technical review, it's level 1. Level 1 means it gets no public notice, and when it goes to level 1, that also means it doesn't get a community meeting. And so technical reviews currently are supposed to kick into the community meetings because that is where we have the environmental review of environmental impacts, and the community gets to see what those are. And then those community meetings then feed into the environmental board's tracking of how we're doing on protecting our environment. So if you take the technical reviews and some of those other level ones, and you say this is a level 1, that means it won't get the community meeting. And so you are going to break that tracking of the environmental impacts. Now, does every single technical review, no matter how small, necessarily need to go to a community meeting? You know, probably not. But we need to have a discussion of what does. It can't just be that, okay, that would be a public utility exemption, level 1. So if they're impacting a critical area, it would not go to a community meeting. Right? And it should. If they're impacting a critical area on public property, the public should know. And it's part of this transparency. So those little level 1s and 2s and 3s actually have significant impact. So if you would look at those pretty carefully to see if it makes sense for those. There's a weird little snippet where technical review is level 1, but Minnie tells me if it's attached to something that is a higher level of review, then it would echo that higher level of review. But that's not clear in the table. So if somebody's looking at that table thinking this is what I have to do, you wouldn't know that by looking at the table. So that's also difficult for someone to follow if they're trying to figure out what my process is, right? So I think that needs to be tidied up. Master site plans, for example, Central Park is quite a new master site plan that the Parks Department did. And so when you talk about doing modifications to Central Park and you say 10%, I go, well, 10% of what? If you want to look at 10% of impervious surface, well, you have ball fields, you have parking lots. So 10% of what's allowed, 10% of, and I still didn't really understand from what Minnie said. I still don't understand. So if you could ask for clarification on that. And then the Parks Department didn't know about the change for the master site plan. And so I think they're going to have a conversation about what they think the process should be for planning parks at their park board meeting. So I would be interested in hearing what they think the right answer is for master site plans, because I really don't understand if taking it to a level 4 site development permit answers the mail, especially if they need a lot of years to get a lot of money, because some of these parks are massively expensive. You might need 15 years in order to get the money to do what you want to on a very large park. So forested hillsides, it seems to me there isn't the question of, if you're going to impact the forested hillsides, what are the very large ways you could not impact those? Could you shrink the road? Could you get rid of a planter strip? Could you do other things to reduce it first? So there's no sort of priority order. The last thing we want to do is impact the forested hillside. Instead, we want to look at 1, 2, and 3 first to see if we actually get to the need for impacting those hillsides. And I don't see this sort of step criteria in there. Do we need sidewalks on both sides of the road because that side of the road won't be connected anyway? I don't know. But there's some of that in past code that actually worked pretty well, where you had to step through all of the options that you could take. And then non-conforming, trying to create pathways for non-conforming uses to do good things while preventing non-conforming uses to do terrible things, I think is the sweet spot that we want to get to. Because right now, there's a threshold, and if you hit that threshold, bam, you have to go into total conformity or it's a big, huge hullabaloo. So where is the discussion on from single family up to lakeside, you're big, and
Connie,
you could do terrible things.
Connie, your 5-minute timer.
Okay,
Could you wrap
I'm
up, please?
really close. So a conversation about where those thresholds should be and what you want to encourage in non-conforming and how you could create criteria for those would be, I think, awesome. That's it. Thank you.
Chair Voice, just checking the room one more time for public comment. Not seeing any, so I'm going to check online. Kim, did you want to speak to public comment tonight?
No, Kyler spoke on behalf of Lakeside and did a great job.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have one call-in user that I am unmuting now. Did you want to speak to public comment tonight?
Oh, no, that's all right.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more. Roberta, did you want to speak to public comment tonight?
That was me just answering.
Oh, okay, that was you. All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Chair Voice, that is everybody.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for participating in the public hearing, all of our attendees, in person and virtually. Wait, nobody was virtual. That's the problem with the script, right? So I'd like to close the public hearing, and it is currently 8:09 p.m. So commissioners, what I've talked with staff previously yesterday, what we'd like to do is move through the policy questions. Again, especially with our audio out, I am going to ask that you guys wave me down. I think it's good practice period, but definitely today it's very helpful. Let me call on you. And then what I'd like to do is once we go through the policy questions is we'll do a round robin follow-up. In case anybody has anything, I'll start with Commissioner Esemuede and we'll move down. But let's get through the policy questions first. You know, people can buzz in as they'd like. And then again, once we kind of work through the policy questions, we'll do a round robin and we'll wrap this up. All right. So I believe, Minnie, you're going to help guide us by putting up the policy questions we have that pertain to parts 1 through 4 this evening. That is where we'd like to stick as far as our deliberations. Again, next week we will be deliberating parts 5 through 8. And then the following week, I believe, is February 2nd. That is where we're going to capture everything that we've discussed, everything the public has discussed in the last 2 weeks, and it'll be a little bit of a free-for-all. We'll be able to discuss almost everything. And ultimately, the idea is by the end of that meeting, we will be giving a recommendation. That is really where you're going to be able to give your vote, your up or down. And we can also do amendments, which I'm horrible at. But there's that option too. All right, so let's begin with deliberations. Minnie, can you kind of guide us through this process?
I can bring that up. And before we launch into the discussion on that, I just wanted to clarify one thing. So we have the representative from Department of Ecology in the audience today. If the commissioners have any questions for them, I can bring up on my screen just a quick synopsis of the Shoreline Master Program for anyone that's interested, and then if you have any questions for Rebecca.
Please.
Okay. So real quickly, so Stephen's saying maybe we should reopen the public hearing to formally capture
Fair enough.
the presentation.
You guys surprised me. I thought we were doing this next week.
We were, I think there was just some miscommunication
Yeah, no, that's fine.
on our team's part. Yep.
We will reopen the public hearing at 8:12 p.m. for the Shoreline Master Program. I believe actually anything technically.
So for the Shoreline Master Program, we've removed the common line setback. This was something that the council asked us to do. It used to be that if you had homes that were closer to the lake's edge, then you could do an average or something, and then, you know, you could still not meet your required minimum setback. So that has been, we actually studied, Watershed Company did a whole characterization of all the parcels and determined that there was not going to be a huge impact as a result of taking that provision away. So that's been removed. There's no longer a reference to buffer reduction because that went away in the critical areas code. The bulkhead removal was an incentive that if you did, and it was hardly ever used, but if you removed it, if you were allowed to build closer to the lake if you removed the bulkhead, but because the bulkhead removal was so extensive, nobody really took us up on that incentive that often, except for one in the last 30 years or so. So, but at the cost of actually getting structures built closer to the lake. So that has been removed. Actually, we're requiring bulkhead removal for new homes and redevelopment. And then the dock lighting standards, because there's a lot of studies that show the color, the temperature, and the intensity of the light from the lakeshore actually impacts the aquatic life. And so there are more stricter dock lighting standards. The last, we've added some thresholds for when the dock lighting has to come into standards, when you're building a new dock or there's some redevelopment that triggers that. The critical area ordinance, which you will look at in your Part 8, has a lot of new standards that will now be attached as an appendix to the Shoreline Master Program. The largest change there is through the best available science analysis that the city did. The stream buffers are 150 feet. So the 3 water bodies that are subject waters of the state will have those buffer increases. So that's the extent of the changes under the SMP. But if you have any questions for Rebecca, we can also address this in our future public hearings as well. More details about it, but due to Department of Ecology's presence here, if you have anything specific for that you'd like to talk about, we can do that now.
All right, well, thank you, Minnie. We appreciate that. Because we've opened the public hearing again, if there's anyone who'd like to speak on the Shoreline Master Plan, we'd ask you to do that now. I guess technically we'd want to do clarifying questions first. Clarifying questions first. I will be the first to admit that because I did not know this was in our agenda tonight, I did not do homework on the SMP, although I know a lot of this work has been done previously, but full disclosure. One thing you guys should know is that as long as we have these public hearings, you can comment on the SMP. You can send questions into staff. So again, if you don't have anything to offer up tonight as far as the SMP, you can still comment on it for the next 3 weeks. So I want to make sure that that's clear. And that's also for our audience. As long as we're having public hearings, we will have that option available. However, our DOE consultant is only here tonight. So, any clarifying questions as far as the SMP? Commissioner Lewis.
I have 2 little questions that are actually not terribly related, but I would like to see if I can better understand something. And it's to say I am having trouble with the ordinary high water mark. With a change in precipitation and with a change of glacial melt, this is something that is not as fixed as we thought it used to be. And using it as a standard, it's been hard to see how this adjusts in real time in our community that has real impacts from flooding. And I'm curious to kind of better understand how some of these things like ordinary high water mark that we default and fall back on, and we say, well, Department of Ecology gives us this, these are the numbers, we don't mess with them. How can I better understand how we're getting these?
Sure.
And thank you for letting us just randomly pick your brain without any background or prep on your part.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me. Rebecca Paget with the State Department of Ecology. I'm a shoreline planner, and I'm helping in the review of the SMP amendment. My understanding, and I'm new to this role, so I hope you'll have patience with me, and if you need something further, I'm happy to go research and get back to you. My understanding with ordinary high water mark is that it is not a static line, like on a bulkhead or something like that. It's determined, generally speaking, on a case-by-case basis. I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but...
Sure. We can have Christian take that one.
So for bodies of water that are regulated in their elevation, like Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish that are tied to the locks out in Ballard, ordinary high water mark shifts summertime and wintertime. So in the summer it comes up, in the winter it drops down to accommodate the influx of rain that we get from local streams. Streams and wetlands, they have a different, more dynamic means for calculating ordinary high water. It's generally the scour mark, where you can see the channel. In lakes, though, like Lake Sammamish or Lake Washington, the ordinary high water mark is often found when you go out to a dock or you look at the shoreline and you see a kind of a stain on rocks or on the pier pilings themselves. Once that water starts dropping down towards the end of the summer. And that is the ordinary high, and it's regulated at 21.8 feet on Lake Washington. I think it's 31.4 or somewhere around there on Lake Sammamish. So it is a set amount, a set elevation that can fluctuate over time given rain. But the high water mark is where jurisdictions measure things from a known point that through the Army Corps of Engineers kind of set those for both of those lake systems.
And when those are set, is that done on an annual review? I mean, we're in a period.
They're permanently set. If they were to change, that would be a large undertaking by Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ecology, based on how much water is flowing out of the locks through the Sammamish Slough to maintain the required cubic feet per second that are through treaty rights and everything, to make sure that the fish passage is consistent.
Clear. Yeah.
Yes.
So so who is monitoring to be able to track effectively the increase in volume and flow that's coming down?
The Army Corps.
And is that something that we have any part in reporting on or monitoring? Because then I'll say that leads me to right now we're using the 100-year, for our flood base, we're using the 100-year mark. And I mean, just in the last 20 years, we've had several 100-year floods in our community alone. And so then there's a question of, well, why wouldn't we use the 500-year as another measure? And I'm curious of kind of how these numbers interplay, of how I can better understand.
Sure.
Because often when we talk to staff tells us, well, this is already set for us, right? This isn't something we determine.
True. The ordinary high water mark is set. The floodplain, those levels can fluctuate, and that's a bigger conversation with King County Flood District.
Yeah, I think we're mixing the issue. They're sort of interrelated, but the floodplain is through the federal, the FEMA maps that does an undertaking of looking at all the maps and then designates the 100-year floodplain and the 500. And we've gone through that exercise of updating our flood regulations and looking at climate change and what is that impact going to have. What do we need to proactively design for base flood elevation plus 1 foot or not? So I don't know, you all were probably briefed on all the flood regulations that were recently updated by the city. The ordinary high water mark for the lakes is set, but for streams, if there is a development proposal that comes in, we would have a surveyor go out and determine actually in the field at that time where that is, and then it gets surveyed and prepared, the plans are prepared accordingly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Esamueda.
So just to pile on to Commissioner Lewis's question regarding, I guess, floodplains, ordinary high water mark. I guess the question is, since we're discussing properties around the shoreline per se, has there been discussions outside of here, of course, with your team and, let's say, the Army Corps of Engineers, because it's understood that the precipitation is more per se today than it was when a lot of those markers were set per se. And I ask this because I've seen examples where in certain jurisdictions where they're essentially remapping out that floodplain and it's affecting properties.
Sure, yeah, so that's, the floodplain is handled by a wing of Department of Ecology, but really the FEMA regulations, the FEMA maps that come out. So yes, they're on periodic updates. That's a huge deal for a lot of people because from insurance perspective and others, the city participates in the program where because we do these things proactively, the property owners get a rebate on flood insurance and things. So that's a very complicated process that we can get into details at some point with you all if you're interested.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the Shoreline Master Plan? All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Minnie, for the presentation. And I'm sorry, what was your name?
Rebecca Paget,
Rebecca.
and my apologies again for the miscommunication and not being able to attend next week. Didn't mean to set you off your game. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate it. All right. Having had clarifying questions, we now would like to open up for public comment. This particular public comment is now solely for the Shoreline Master Plan. So would anyone like to make a public comment in regarding to the presentation they just heard from Rebecca and Minnie? You have your typical 5 minutes.
Okay, Shoreline Master Program. Much the same, but having 150-foot buffers that you can't do very much with is awesome. Lighting is awesome. And I think there's a clearer connection to the critical area code within the Shoreline Master Program. That's just it right there. And the confusing part will be that people, while they're reading the Shoreline Master Program, are going to want to flip to the code elsewhere instead of going down to the code that's below it. And over time, they could end up being different pieces for a while as you change one. I don't know how that's exactly going to work, but I want to be sure that the Shoreline Master Program clearly states that and is linked to the code that goes below. And then this is a general problem with both our critical area code and especially our Shoreline Master Program, in that when we have our large bodies of water and someone wants to impact those larger bodies, especially wetlands, they tend to get handled through the Corps and then through ecology. And both of those groups of people like banks, and they want the mitigations to go into banks. But we have this glorious wetland, and we have a state park, and we have this amazing fish habitat. And so we are then losing the opportunity to continue to improve our own area with mitigation. And we're pretty good at it. They want it that way because there's a lot of places that don't have the luxury of these huge wetlands that we can do improvement with. And I just keep wondering if there's not some better way for us to create our own mitigation bank or an agreement with these entities and be able to keep some of our improvements on site as compared to shipping them off elsewhere. Now, if there's some mitigation up on a hill, I could see why it could go to a bank somewhere else because it's not so connected. But you just look at that valley floor and everything you could do to make it awesome, yet instead people are paying money and shipping it off to a different mitigation bank, which is great, but not necessarily great for our habitat. And that is like a discussion with the state and discussion with the feds. So you guys probably aren't going to win that discussion, but at least you could ask for that discussion to happen and see what better thing we could get done. Thanks.
Is there anyone in the room that would like to speak to the Shoreline Master Plan? Stephen, do we have anyone online that would like to speak to it?
I'm not seeing any hands online. Just give it a second. Yeah, no one online wants to speak to public comment.
Okay. And next week, again, that was my faux pas, but next week, people will be able to still continue to comment on this SMP during our public hearing on Title 18. So we won't do a specific second presentation. Again, that was my fault, but we will still take comments on the SMP. So I would like to close the public hearing at 8:28. Okay. I was saying something, basically about the way we're going to deliberate. And so I think what we'd like to do is have Minnie put the questions, the policy questions, up on the screen for our commissioners. And please, again, just raise your hand, let me call on you. And then once we get through the policy questions, we'll do a final round robin. And that should take us through our regular business. So please, Minnie.
I think one of your commissioners has a question. Or?
Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you. I'd like to start this discussion of policy question number 1 with a question, if you'll humor me, Minnie, especially because we have council tonight. I have been diving into kind of, so for it's page 79, for anyone looking at the pre-application community meeting. So there's this notion, well, this is what we've been told, right, is that there needs to be one public hearing. And that is based on RCW 3670B120. For anybody who's gone and read it, you're in good company. I did too, and I'm reading it really differently, and I would love to be straightened out. Because I'm reading that this is just for consolidation, and it's only if the applicant has multiple permits and they pick that they're consolidating them. So if an applicant doesn't pick that, then it doesn't apply. And I'm reading that, as I think my note says, each local government shall determine which permits are subject to open record and disclosures. So Issaquah could decide, actually, no, we want to have more than one based on the RCW, that we're not as boxed in as we think. So I would love to be straightened out by our council to kind of figure out if we're able to have pre-application meetings plus a public hearing, if we as a community are able to decide it, because my reading of the RCW is not as straightforward.
I think maybe the pre-application community meeting is just informational meeting. It's not a public hearing. You're just sharing the information. The application hasn't come in yet. It's before the applicant is in the design phase and wants to hear from the community. So that's that section that you're looking at. Once an application is in, yes, there's a state law that the applicant can bump up if there's a variance needed and a development commission decision needed. They have the right to bump up everything to the highest body, and they can hold one hearing on both those applications, a variance and a site development permit.
But that's only if they consolidate, right? Am I reading that right?
That's consolidation of bumping everything to the highest level for the hearing purposes. What we're talking over here is one public hearing. So you can't have it can be a continuation of the hearing or whatever kind of thing, but you can't get into a series of public hearings over the same application. So in the case of a quasi-judicial rezone, you hold one public hearing, and then you have to make a decision. The council could hold a closed record hearing. They would take all the information, but they can't talk to anyone. So you again are kind of creating these nuances. So therefore, our recommendation was the hearing examiner builds that record, collects all the public testimony, and then makes a decision in looking at the criteria, and prepares all that record for council then to make a decision on it. But it can be, but it would still bar the council from holding their own open record hearing. If council chooses to hold their open record hearing where they want to directly hear from the community members, then the third option would apply, that they would hold the public hearing themselves and make a decision. They won't get a public hearing held by either PPC or a hearing examiner.
regardless of the consolidation that's been chosen or not chosen.
The consolidation is of different permits. I think the
Right.
section that you're referencing, this is one application. There's no consolidation. It's, once an application comes in, you have to have one public open record hearing. I don't know if, Rachel, you want to add to anything more? Okay.
It's not a very well-written statute. It's a confusing statute. It's not very well written, but it does say you can only have one hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Anyone would like to speak on policy question 1? Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. Last week, we talked about the value of the commissioners up here being lived experience, and I have gone through this process with a hearings examiner, and I found it to be really beneficial because it was so impartial, and that it was set on criteria and the public was included. So that would be, just wanted to put my vote out there, my voice out there, that I am in favor of the recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Altamore. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Altamore. I agree with you with a caveat, and for a similar reason. The collection of the public comment is a very technical thing to do, and the lived experience burdened, can be carried by the City Council as elected officials who have their responsibility to the city at large. So I appreciate the pairing. But as I said earlier today, I was concerned about the accessibility of the hearing examiner, and I think that we do need to make a list of public hearings that need to be during our public time. So that could be site-specific rezones, it could be preliminary plats, it could be a whole number of things. I think you knew intuitively what they were anyway. Oh. It's not the fire alarm, thank God. Okay, so I am also for the recommendation with that caveat. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. This room, these last 2 weeks, something else. Commissioners, any other, Commissioner Lewis?
I was actually very interested last week in the thinking outside of the box. When Jesse had the suggestion of the combination. I like the idea of having the public hearing sit with the hearing examiner, and I like the idea of using our boards and commissions for the very purpose that we have them, and being able to have the City Council, when making that decision, they have multiple sources and opinions. So while I like the idea of having the public hearing sit with the hearing examiner, I like the idea of having PPC being able to submit their advice to council as well for the site-specific rezones. So I thought that was a lovely way to be able to have the best of all worlds.
With the site-specific rezones, the objective should be that there shouldn't be advice. The objective, I think, should be that people meet the criteria or they don't meet the criteria. And so I think the goal should be is to create criteria that you as policymakers are comfortable with, and then to hopefully find a decision maker who is able to apply those criteria in a bias-free manner and free of any political influence. And that's not to say that anyone in any of the legislative or advisory boards is biased, but it's really hard to be objective, even if it's, unconsciously, when it's your community, when it's your home. I mean, I know at least for my own self, and I think that we can all just have some sort of kind of unconscious feelings about projects like that. And when we have someone who's a trained professional come in, I think that they're more able to just look at, does this meet this criteria or does it not? Of course, that doesn't preclude anyone in the community, including any member of an advisory board, from coming and giving their opinion or making their, giving their advice in the form of making testimony or giving, their comment to the hearing examiner. So you can still give your, advice or your feedback that way, but I don't think that the purpose of, I don't think that when you're dealing with quasi-judicial matters, that it's really, they're not policy decisions. They're really specific legal issues, and so it's kind of dangerous and risky to even think about them in terms of giving advice. That's looking at it more through a policy lens, I think.
Commissioner Kennedy?
I just wanted to support the hearing examiner recommendation. In part, some of the same comments that you've made, but we really have to think about this as bringing in a disinterested third party. We do bring a lot of great community experience to a lot of parts of this job, but when a really objective decision needs to be made, we have to be really honest about how black and white we can be. We went through this process at the end of the year and we struggled. And we struggled because we knew the party making the request. I mean, it's the reason that if you're impaneled on a jury, well, you wouldn't be impaneled on a jury where you knew the litigants or the counsel. The reason is because you're not impartial. We're not impartial to things that are brought before us in this community. And there are these decisions that really need black and white, super objective, disinterested third parties to look at it. So I think we really need to pay attention to that on this particular policy question.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. That was perfect because I'm going to share my lived experience, and I believe at the end of the year, this came up. And I have to be honest, part of the reasons I recused myself was because I had a particular interest. And I had a great conversation with staff, and I think the problem, and I agree with, I believe, Commissioner Kennedy, Commissioner Altamore, Commissioner Milligan, is it showed me that it is very difficult to do that. And if I'm being honest with myself, really the planning policy, the whole idea, and this is to create the policy and then entrust that we've done our job to pass it off to that disinterested third party. My lived experience also remembers a commissioner here, Commissioner Monahan, when all of us were talking about a specific rezone that I won't mention, and I think all of us had our opinions on it, and I think that bird was going down until he actually said, guys, they did everything they were supposed to do. Even if we don't like it, technically they've checked off all their boxes. I think we still said no, and council actually came back and said, no, Commissioner Monahan was right. They technically did what they were needed to do. So I agree, and that's my lived experience. So I'm in agreement with the commissioners. I agree that the hearing examiner, then to city council, is the most appropriate form moving forward. Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, nothing new to add. I'll just go on the record saying that I think that it's really a question of, who can best determine, like, yes, it does or no, it doesn't meet these criteria, what has been said all along. And I think given that the hearing examiner, followed by decision by city council, makes the most sense here.
Right. I mean, Chair Voice, again, I think our job is really to set the policy, to create the policy, and then let it go forth in the world. And then have, like Commissioner Kennedy said, third party. Would anyone else like to comment on policy question 1?
So just for the record, do we want to just take a yeas and nays on this so that we can reflect it in your recommendation to council committee?
I think that's a good idea because that'll make our job on February 2nd a little earlier if we can knock out the ones that we have what looks like a majority agreement. And again, obviously that night people can throw up amendments, but I think you can get the flavor of what's going to happen. So this is non-binding, so we're just looking for yays or nays. Who believes in policy option 1? Hearing examiner collects the information, sends it off to city council. Who makes the decision?
Thank you.
There you go.
So for the record, unanimous.
What's that?
It's unanimous decision to.
Sorry. I started thinking you guys were going to make me bungle up a motion or something. Okay. I started having nightmares. What? Yes. Okay. So the policy decision it was unanimous up here. All yeas agreeing that the public hearing should be held by the hearing examiner and then on to city council.
Thank you. So this is the 9 criteria that, and our attempt to fix the language, make it more clear, especially the number 2 in terms of the density and the growth targets, all that conversation we had. So we've kept the legislative intent of the discussions, but, and I think we earlier talked about maybe perhaps eliminating criteria number 1, and city attorney sort of nodded on or agrees with that concept, but beyond that change. So does everyone agree, have any heartburn over number 1 if we eliminated it? You're good? Eliminate. Okay.
Would you guys like to speak, or am I? Okay,
No.
Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. My question is, do the other criteria pick up enough if there was a detrimental impact? So this says that there is public benefit or enhanced public health, safety, and welfare. Do the other criteria do enough to say that there isn't, that there isn't the opposite of that?
Yeah, number 9 gets to that one, the probable adverse environmental impacts of the type of development allowed by the proposed zone can be mitigated. So if there is an impact, if that you can somehow mitigate it, screening by some vegetation or, whatever that impact might be. I think the other conversation at the last meeting was, can we add a criteria about traffic? So that's what I remember in terms of adverse impact for traffic could probably be a separate criteria that you all can add.
Commissioner Altamore, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. So that does pick up the environmental. I like the idea of the traffic, but the other health and safety, I just wonder if there's still a missing piece there. And I don't know if it is just as non-specific to say that there isn't a detriment in these pieces versus there's a public benefit.
Commissioner Esamuede.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Commissioner Milligan regarding the leaving at least the that number 1, or at least clarifying it a little bit more. And but I think the essence of it is public safety, public health, because there are zoning that can actually, when you have a specific zone in or rezone, the property or what's actually being developed there could actually affect the public health or the safety and whatnot. So I would look at it as possibly rewriting that portion to make it a little bit more measurable per se, but I would actually remain it, keep it there.
Commissioner Milligan.
Number 1, it was Commissioner Altamore, thank you, so I don't want to take credit away. But I hadn't thought enough about this, but so kind of off the cuff, I think that I haven't found this to be problematic to me, except that it's not measurable, but the other 8 criteria create the burden more than this one, but perhaps if we could, I don't know if I can make a decision on this tonight, but I'm leaning towards, because of Commissioner Altamore, the reverse of the statement, that this site-specific rezone does not cause a detrimental effect to public health, safety, and welfare. Maybe there's something that's a little more provable on the other side, but I don't think I could even vote on that tonight.
Thank you. Any other comment on policy question number 2? Commissioner Milligan.
Yeah, number 1's just number 1. There are 8 more to talk about. And so the ones that I wanted to talk about, of course, was number 2. The number 2B in particular, thank you very much for updating number 2. And you know what? I'm going to backtrack just a minute here because we always forget to do this. We just dive right in and say, God, I want you to fix this. First thing I want to say is I'm so glad to be at this point where there's so much of this that we love, and thank the staff for all the work that they've done. And I also want to say thanks you to the public for providing all the comments they do about this and any other topic. I can't amplify all of them, but I really appreciate that they have made comments. And I hope that they're also smart and valuable, that I know that the staff is giving them the credibility that they deserve. Okay, so, but moving on to the really fun stuff, like, this is why I want this better. 2B, again, the language still confuses whether you've met a target that can be 20 years from now, and whether you've met it today doesn't apply. And I wondered if just the smallest edit could say that you, that if it's housing growth targets must be on track at the time of the application. Now, I haven't figured out how you're going to measure that. Maybe are we a tenth of the way when we're in 1 year of 10 years from a target? I don't know, but just say that they've been met in 2022 for a target that applies in 2040 is still the problem with 2B. And then number 4, reasonable, that word makes me uncomfortable because I don't think it's specific and measurable enough. And number 6, another phrase that I don't think is measurable enough is immediate vicinity. If you mean adjacency or something like that, if we can use a more specific word, I'd appreciate that. And then number 9, to not overlook, can be mitigated. Again, this seems like a place to amplify the public comment earlier about our lack of general support for mitigating when we can just be supporting the standards, upholding standards. We'd rather uphold our standards because they're there to maintain something rather than allowing some in the example earlier, it had to do with wetland, taking from wetland. You could do that if you mitigate it. Well, no, we really just don't want to lose our wetlands. So anyway, number 9, word mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Anyone else like to speak on policy question 2 involving the criteria for site-specific rezone? Commissioner Lewis.
I think it's fair to say to staff that this, right now, I think that we need this to be tweaked a little bit, but we have the right intent. So if we would love to be able to see this again with another wording option that I think consolidates. In a sense, I think we can do these things by actually maybe cutting 2, combining, and being able to be a little crisper in what we're handing off. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Any other further comments? All right, Chair Voice, I like what Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Milligan just had to say. I agree with Commissioner Lewis. The intent is there. There are a few words that I had underlined. Detrimental was the one that struck me on number 6, because again, how do you define detrimental? And again, I'm looking for my traffic. So I'd like to see traffic as part of it, because again, I guess that could be part number 6, but if someone's asking for a site-specific rezone, I'd like that at least to be part of the criteria. Again, I think I'd like to see that. And again, there's a couple words in there. And to Commissioner Milligan's point, yes, I also agree with the targets. That was I believe we had quite a long conversation about that. That makes no sense, because we're going to be 99%, well, maybe not 99. We're going to be a majority of our time always below our target line. So, I mean, again, our new targets are what, 2040? I think I like the idea of a track or some type of tracking system. Are we on track? Okay, if we're not on track and we're having a housing crisis, that's one thing. If we're above track, then it doesn't make sense to have site-specific rezones in some areas outside the regional growth center. So, or at least needs to be a higher hurdle. My 2 cents. Any other comment on policy question 2? All
So I
right,
think to summarize, number one, we need to either reverse it or kind of address some concerns that we heard. On number two, it shouldn't be the 20-year targets have been met today as a marker. It should be on track, so we'll figure out what to do with that. Number 6, define detrimental and immediate vicinity a little bit better. Number 9, mitigation, you don't like that, so we can reword that. And lastly, come up with a criteria to address traffic. So we can propose some edits to address those things that we heard in our conversation today for your last meeting. Yep.
okay, Commissioner Milligan.
Can I ask on number 4, did the word reasonable,
To be defined.
did that resonate with people too?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Altamore.
I blame Commissioner Milligan for my coming up with this question because I hadn't thought of it before. But for number 9, is there an example where we would allow an environmental impact, whether or not it could be mitigated?
As part of a rezone, you generally wouldn't, especially adverse impact, but generally that would be a basis of denial of a rezone.
So would that be a necessary criteria, or could we consider striking that one?
I mean, you could leave the mitigation part out, saying if there's probable adverse impact, then you cannot have an adverse environmental impact as part of this rezone. It's hard to evaluate because as part of the rezone, you're really not proposing a project. It's just what else you could do under the zone, so it'll have to be some kind of a comparison between the allowed uses here and the allowed uses there and the density here and the form and intensity here, kind of a cost, comparative analysis between the two rezones.
Commissioner Milligan.
Love that. Commissioner Altamore, do we have to have number 9 at all?
I'm
Because-
looking at our legal counsel if we can delete it.
I'm thinking that environmental impacts would be dealt with somewhere else, and that we wouldn't consider a site-specific rezone that had an adverse environmental impact, considering the temperature of the community. I think they'd be not in favor of that.
Correct, and we have updated our code so that, any development will have to comply with environmental regulations.
So Chair Voice, I'm actually going to depart from my wonderful colleagues and say I'd like that to continue to stay in. Environment's very broad. I mean, that's a very broad word. I mean, what are we talking about? And again, to your point, we're talking about zoning. I mean, these aren't projects that are passed. These aren't SEPA reviewed. These aren't anything. So you're really clipping people's abilities to do it. I mean, again, we shouldn't make site rezones impossible for people. And depending on how you define the environment, that could be any type of impact. That could be moving a rock. Commissioner Esamwede.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is mitigated. If there is an adverse environmental impact, it has to be mitigated, and that's where I think the essence of 9 is not saying that, hey, we're going to approve something where it has an adverse environmental impact. We're only going to approve something that may have a potential adverse impact, but it's mitigated per se.
Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I agree. I like the kind of, because it seems so broad, I think you could say that like a parking spot, right, might have an adverse environmental impact, and then are we never going to improve like anything that potentially has like a parking spot or a paved area at all? I think you could get really kind of unwieldy with that. So I like the inclusion of, or keeping number 9 and specifying the mitigation piece.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bader. Commissioner Patterson.
Yeah, now that we are moving towards a hearing examiner being the one to weigh this criteria, as I understand it, I would also maybe suggest or want to see that lens put on this criteria, meaning almost like a test run of how a hearing examiner would analyze an application with the criteria, with adjustments made as needed or, suggested to us to review. So maybe more of a legal lens per se, to kind of really analyze this and say, how would this hold up against a real world application, assuming we move towards the hearing examiner process.
Commissioner Esamuede.
And to Commissioner Patterson's point, and this goes back to the first policy question regarding the hearing examiner, who would be able to ascertain that the hearing examiner has examined what the public has brought forward in line with these policies or these 9 criteria that we've set up, would that the PPC has recommended forward essentially?
Yeah, so the way the process would work would be the city staff administration would make a recommendation to the hearing examiner, prepare a staff report. The hearing examiner will hold the public hearing, get the public testimony, then he or she will actually prepare his or her findings and produce a report that then is appealable and all that. So they actually evaluate and write up how this proposal meets or doesn't meet the criteria. That then goes to city council. So it's written findings for how the proposal meets these 8 or 9 criteria.
Okay, so when the hearing examiner does their final report, it goes straight to city council, or will your staff review it first, or will there be?
It'll go as is, but we schedule on the council agenda, we do the notice and all that. That goes with getting on the council. But yeah, we don't change anything from hearing that comes from the hearing examiner.
Okay, I guess legal process, okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Esamuede. So I guess what we're looking for is yays, at least to give staff some direction. Sounds like everybody's comfortable with the edits that were made through 1 through 8. Do I have that correct? Can I get a show of hands? Okay, that is unanimous. And then as far as 9, I know this might be where we break down a little bit. Who's in favor of keeping number 9 as is, or with mitigation possibly changed or dialed in a little bit more? Who's in favor of keeping number 9? Commissioner Altamore.
Can we make sure that the mitigation, that there's some sort of, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yes.
ultimately, I think when we have a motion, Stephen, to actually pass, we can start making amendments after amendments, and people can start tearing things apart. But ultimately, I think we're just trying to give them the flavor of where we're going, so they know where to spend more time. And again, to your point, yes, I guess that's what we're getting at, Minnie. The majority of the people up here on the dais, I believe, I didn't get a count, are looking to keep number 9, possibly defining mitigation a little bit better.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right, let's move on to policy question number 3. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the discussion tonight about this topic. I need to study this more to see the limits that are in the IMC chapters that are referenced in each of these potential deviations, to see if it feels as permissive as it does when you read it in this chapter. So with that, I still don't know. So I need to do a little more studying. Thank you very much for the information. But one of the things that does still stick with me goes to letter D. where the requested deviation eliminates an unnecessary inconvenience to the applicant. This language does not seem to express a measurable or even convincing reason, because an unnecessary inconvenience doesn't seem a reason to deviate from our standards. It seems like a, hey, I just want to be nice. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to cause you any inconvenience. So that phrase is still a sticking point for me. I don't have a replacement, but maybe somebody else's code says it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Commissioner Lewis?
I'll reiterate my earlier concern when I had a question. I still have concerns about the I would like to limit the number of deviations an applicant can have. The idea that they would be able to take all of these because then, they're having a trade-off is something I have a concern about. And I think that an applicant should have to pick and choose and maybe modify their site plan and modify their plan if they want so many deviations. Then I think that might be a red flag, and we need to have a path forward that says, pick 2, for instance.
Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, just a quick comment, just on the first section. It probably applies to others as well, but especially in light of the conversation we just had, I noticed that in Section A, Part 2, provide flexibility that will help promote rehabilitation and reuse, will not adversely affect nearby properties or neighborhood character. And then also D2 will have no appreciable adverse events impact on health, safety, or general welfare of surrounding properties. Should we include environmental impacts in those 2 sections as well? So it won't adversely affect nearby properties, neighborhood character, or the environment. And same with the no appreciable adverse impact on health, safety, general welfare, and the environment.
Yeah, I think we can look into those edits.
Commissioner Milligan.
+1 on that. Bader, thank you.
Any other further comments on policy question 3? All right, Chair Voice. I'm generally in favor. I don't think it's a large list. I do appreciate Minnie's earlier commentary about they were so broad that people were picking from 25. I think these 9, even if my fellow commissioners feel they should be tightened up, I do believe the deviations are necessary to projects, especially with building costs, everything going up. The idea that sites are unique. There's no 2 sites that are alike. You have to be able to build properly without building triangles and architecture houses, which everybody makes fun of. There's a reason why. So I think deviations are an important part of the building process. We want to keep costs down. That's one way we can do it. I think having a narrower list is helpful, and I do think, to Minnie's point earlier, it was really the discretion, which really meant there was 25 different options. I think having a smaller buffet is good. I don't know if it's necessary to let only people pick 2. Just the way I'm reading it, it seems like they can pick from one of the 9 individual things. So yes, technically they can do 9, but it's not like they're doing 9 of the same type of deviations in one area, like, so, intensity and form. It's not like they're doing 9 deviations there. So I'm in favor of having a narrower list. I'm perfectly fine with the list that we have, but that's my feeling. Any other? Vice Chair Bader?
I'll chime in there too, because I think Minnie, your example was really helpful on the forested hillsides one, that it's only like 10 feet. It's not like saying, oh, you can have a deviation, now you can cut down every single tree on that entire hillside. That we're talking about really small changes in this section. So in light of that, I think, again, to kind of be flexible, it makes sense to have a list as it is.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Bader. Any further comments as far as policy question 3? All right, we can move along.
So that's pretty much what we had originally identified as policy questions. And then through the public comments that you all received, there are some of these additional ones. If you agree that you want to talk about these 5, we can kind of go through those.
I think we're in it to win it, Minnie. So
Okay.
I think we can talk about it. Let's do it like this. If anyone we'll start the round robin. If anyone has something to bring up on these 5, please feel free to. If anyone has additional commentary about the last 3 we discussed, please feel free to. But let's do it like that. And once we're through the round robin, if somebody wasn't ready, obviously we won't finish, but we'll just get going with the round robin. So Commissioner Esamwede, because you're at the end of the dais, we'll start with you, please.
I think, and if I remember, the master site plan, I think there was a threshold for, I believe, a public hearing if there was a change of 10%, I believe. So and this may be more clarifying, my question per se on that is, why didn't they use acreage as opposed to a percentage on that?
Yeah, I think the existing code had those criteria, the building height, the impervious surface. So you're looking at form and scale of what is changing. And it was based on what was already approved to how much is it changing. So it's a relative to was already approved. Is it a 10% here or there? As opposed to you have a 15-acre site, so you get percentage, because most of the master site plans were for larger projects anyways. So tying it to a parcel size probably won't make much of a difference.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Since for the most part, like you said, they're larger as opposed to varied.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for me right now.
Okay.
And remember, we can come back. We're just going to kick this off. So Commissioner Kennedy.
I don't have any further questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Patterson.
I yield my time.
It's a good one.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Altamore.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Commissioner Milligan.
C-SPAN, that's the C-SPAN effect. I want to, I think we already talked about the evening hours. Just want to make sure I got everything. The evening hours, deviations are limited in the code, and the growth target language. So I think we got all of my real favorites. Now in here, I wish I could remember more about the public utility exemptions, because this was something that caught my eye, but I can't remember why. And I want to support that, but I can't remember the specifics. So if you can remind me.
Yeah, so let me see if I can pull them up on.
Thank you. Yeah, public notice required seemed to be more important to me than, especially when it's an administrative decision. These things kind of, they're important topics, and they can be very impactful, and without public notice, just makes people mad.
Okay, I think I found it. So let me share. I don't know if you can
Chair voice.
see it large enough.
Is it one
but let
topic
me-
per round? Just keep going when it's your turn.
Choose my horse carefully here, right? You have the floor. I mean, again, we'll do a final comeback, but
I'm
yeah.
coming back. Okay. I wanted to follow up on some of the public comments. I wanted to follow up on vesting and just say that I do not want to make a decision about vesting. This legal minefield to me, and I think we have references. We do have counsel in the room, and I'd be happy to hear it, but I would rather have somebody else make that decision because I don't have anything to stand on that. The ADUs, it's interesting to think about a larger size when there's a larger than the minimum lot size. That's creative and interesting. I'm not as interested to go over 1,000 square feet because it is an accessory dwelling unit. We're going to talk about this in a later meeting, what is accessory, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Commissioner Lewis.
Minnie, do you mind pulling up the slide that you have of the questions you had of possible policies?
Sure. Real quick on the public agency and utility exemption, I think there was a question to what can you remind us? So this was a carryover from our existing code. However, there was exemptions for basically it was if there's a sewer line, water line, or whatever that is needed to serve the community, and you can't do it because of these regulations. There's this exemptions for that. It did not have a criteria under the code, so we have added the criteria B1 through 5. So that's the change with this code update, but I'm happy to bring the other presentation up.
Chair Voice, so just to clarify, Minnie, you guys have actually tightened what was originally the part of the code.
Yeah, there was no
You've actually tightened
criteria.
it up.
It was just an exemption.
Okay.
Now it's, you have no other alternative. You have a much higher bar. The debate or the comment now is whether that should be a public process or a level 1 versus level 2. I think it doesn't really matter if we can make it a level 2 and just do some notice before we do that. So that's sort of this question. If you all agree to make it level 2, that's an easy fix for us to make.
Okay, well, I apologize, Commissioner Lewis, we will get to you. As far as the public utilities, I think that's, to Minnie's point, I mean, these are utilities that have no other place to go, they're necessary. Does anyone have a problem with the code as written? And then we'll talk about levels in a second. Does anyone have a problem as far as the code as written now? Commissioner Lewis.
As you know, I will always advocate for more public notice, more transparency, more daylight. We've had issues before with there being the notion the utility had to go somewhere and therefore trees had to go. And through public intervention, we've been able to say, actually, this can be redesigned and done a little bit differently, and it was of a value to the community. So I would be a fan of moving it to level 2 to be able to have more public awareness of things. I think that public utilities are things that, while necessary, do require there to be public notice. We have to play by the same rules on this side of the fence as we do with everyone else in the community.
Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Asamoah.
Yeah, I was actually gonna pile on to Commissioner Lewis because at the end of the day, even if there's no alternative for that public agency, I believe, and this isn't going to the point of of course, a public hearing, but a public notice level 2 would be warranted because it's going to affect. It could potentially affect the citizens within Issaquah if one day they wake up and there's construction in front of their home, basically. So I believe something like that would be needed, level 2.
All right, Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Is there another place where that public notice would happen? Or could I wake up one morning and like the street in front of my house has been ripped up to put in a new sewer, and on the kind of other side, does this like slow down if there's like an emergency, right? Where like something has happened to a sewer line and it needs to be moved. I don't know if that's even like a possible scenario, but like, does it stop like emergency fixes and that sort of thing, or slow them down?
Yeah, this isn't for your emergency repairs. This is for new stuff. So there's already, you're exempt to do those emergency things and then come back after the fact to kind of do the, if there's water pipe breaks, you're going to get the repairs, ASAP, not go through the permitting process for that kind of stuff.
So I think we're almost ready to pass on our advice. I just have a very quick question for council. Since they're public utilities, is this eminent domain? I mean, are we just notifying the public because we feel it's a good thing to do? Or is there any pushback they can actually really give at a public hearing other than just saying, I don't like this?
I always forget about the microphone. Sorry. Rachel Turpin, City Attorney. Good question. Actually, most utilities do have the power of eminent domain, so they can condemn the property if they do need it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I guess that kind of just changed my vote, so.
It doesn't mean they wouldn't still, once they own the property, have to abide by like your critical areas codes, though, I suppose. Like they would still have to, they would have to, any property owner would have to, even the city has to abide by its own tree removal codes and.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So I guess, council, if we had a level 2 review, I guess we would still expect them to do the certain SEPA, the certain requirements that are obligated there.
Yes.
And if we had a lower one, then they could actually use our code and say, well, we don't need to do these things. Am I getting that right? Kind of?
I don't think so. I think that I don't think this level of review would change what they would have to do. I think it truly is just the level of notice, correct? Yeah, it's just a level of notice. And I believe that, at least how I was reading the staff comments on this issue, that the public there would still be notice of other aspects of the project. For instance, wouldn't there be other permits that they would be applying for that would be higher review? So even if the public weren't getting, even if the utility exemption itself were only a level 1, in practicality, folks would still be getting notice because they would be getting notice through notice of the, what would they be getting, like a building or a site, like an excavation permit or?
These would be things like through the capital improvement projects list that are long-term projects that Public Works, Engineering, other departments would be looking to build. So they're not quick things generally. They are, we need a new sewer line here. We need a new water line to run through some part of the community. And when they run up against the critical area codes in 802, this is how they could go through the process, still meet that criteria, but there's no other way to go. Water has to go this way,
Right.
And so they're engineering this out, and when there is no alternative to go around something, Squawk Mountain, they have to run somewhere, and that might clip a critical area, and that's what they're utilizing this for.
But that does require people to then follow that project. So if you want folks to then get a specific notice of the exemption, then you would want to make it a level 2.
I guess the only other question I have, and I'll make this quick, is just from staff, what type of burden would that put on you is there any additional burden? Staff resources?
Staff resources are always needed. A public notice takes time, printing, mailing, all of those kind of things. But it won't be used that often, so it's not a big deal.
Sure, fair enough.
So it's only 4 cases where it's an absolute necessary kind of situation. So it's not, our recommendation, we don't have a strong, if you want to make it level 2, that will be fine.
Commissioner Lewis?
I just want to point out that tonight we also read code about message boards. This would also apply to a message board, which is actually, we have a code for a double message board that's required in our codes, which would then be triggered by a level 2. So it's a double notification that would then happen. It's not just a mailing out, it's also the site putting up a notification board as well.
Does everyone feel like they have enough information? And we'll just kind of put, again, yays or nays. It's not binding as far as tonight, but give staff the idea of where we're going to go. The question is, level 2 or level 1? Who's for level 1? Who's for level 2?
Thank you.
Unanimous.
It's the same thing for technical document review, so that was a question we skipped, but again, I think here, the way this whole process is supposed to work, this is a new thing that we've kind of inserted, so you get early decisions, early look at, and then also accommodate Development Commission's desire to not have all these technical documents and them be the final decision makers on those. So this addresses that. There was a public comment about whether level 1 makes sense for this or not. I think we have some way to either not just make it level 1 or level 2, but if the underlying work you want to do doesn't require level 2, then it would stay as level 1. But if there is an underlying, if it needs to go through Development Commission and this is an interim step, then we would process it as level 2. Or we can just make it simple and just call it level 2. So either way, we can make it work. So level 1, level 2, or a combination of level 1, if it's a very simple thing that wouldn't have required a decision, or public notice anyways, and level 2 for everything else.
Commissioner Milligan.
Okay. Let me see if I understand this. So this is the technical review of geotech reports or whatever the heck is happening with an application that then creates a package or something that goes to inform the Development Commission, who can read it with their discretion as part of the greater application.
So the way this is designed to work is, if you want to build a 10,000 square foot building and you happen to have a wetland on your property and you want to know what buffers are going to apply to you, is it a class 1 or is it a class 2? You could go through this technical document review earlier than your whole overall design project, because it's costly to kind of go back and redesign because now you have to move it back. That you would come in for a technical document review for the purposes of figuring out what's my buffer that's going to apply to my property. And then we would process it, give them a decision, create a staff report, and prior to giving them the decision, because it's a critical area, we could do this public meeting notice and all that kind of stuff as a level 2 review. And then that decision, then if someone disagrees that it should actually be 1 or 2, can file an appeal to the hearing examiner and get that, worked out before you prepare your building plans and go through the Development Commission. You can do it concurrently, you can do it early. It's designed to provide more options for folks to get some answers early. You don't have to do it. You could choose to skip the step because you feel comfortable, you know what it is, and you just want to start your process that way.
So it actually, what you just said, Minnie, to package that is ultimately, if the technical documents can be reviewed in level 1, that just allows the builder to understand their own property, whether or not it's even feasible. Okay, I know where I'm going to go. Any other clarifying questions? No clarifying questions. Any other comments on policy question 4? Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. I do remember the Development Commission commenting on this, and I'm not saying I took a poll, but I do remember some comment about this. And then I also remember challenges that I faced as Urban Village Development Commissioner, being faced with making decisions that included evaluating a geotech report, for instance, in Talus 7 and 8. And I didn't like having to do that because I didn't have the criteria or the means by which to make a good determination. And the early on determination of this does help to restrict or to limit or to inform an applicant. So, and that public notice, as long as, and I'm making an assumption that the technical review has, because it's technical, is very strict, I think that this is something that could be done as a level 1. I'm leaning that way.
Would anyone else like to comment? We'll do thumbs up, thumbs down. Commissioner Esamwede.
Yeah, and then just to clarify that the technical review, what this is stating is the technical review will be level 1, but once that's done and determine if it's feasible to move forward with that, it goes to the development commission. Okay, very well.
Yeah, I think the public comments we're getting at, you won't get the community's input because you won't know what, the history of the wetlands in the area or something that you may miss out on that community involvement for the critical areas piece if you bifurcate them and you don't allow any notice earlier. But the chances are, most people are going to bundle everything together, but they'll want their decisions early. So the public notice will probably get triggered anyways because there'll be a SEPA or something else going on with that, with the application.
I guess one clarifying piece is that once that feasibility study has been done per se, then they would come to a forum like this, the developer, to present their case to move forward with their development. And at that point, those commissioners can ask, maybe not technical questions, but they can ask questions and receive responses that are a little bit more informed based on that technical review. Is that right?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but, when they come to the Development Commission, the staff prepares a staff report. It's kind of a fully baked project, whether it meets the criteria or not, and it's in front of the Development Commission. We can engage them early during pre-application community meetings, but once it goes to the final Development Commission, it is a staff report. It's the 90% design plans.
Oh, okay.
It's like, it's not, you're still evaluating what to do kind of thing.
Okay. And then basically what this is stating here is that typically if you do a level 2, you would basically give a notice that they have an intent to do something, hear it, possibly, and then once it goes through that process, then they can move forward with their technical review.
Yeah, Development Commission wouldn't get involved with a level 2, but the community would get a notice in the mail. You probably get a posting on your site saying this is what we're doing in this location. Chances are some, people may not do the project once they find out, and so then you've got this site posted and mailing thing that happened, but the project never went through. So there's some nuances like that can happen with public notice. So we want to notify the public, but perhaps based on the project.
If
I
it's
don't know if you
actually
have
moving
anything to add to
forward.
that, Christian. You've given it some more thought.
Yeah, I think we wanted to make sure, as level 1, the majority of the community is single-family residential. If they want to know, what can I do to my, on my house? Can I add on to the back? Well, just like they might evaluate the structure of their home, find out where the wetland is or where a stream is. With that knowledge, then they can move forward and know, here's my limits of where I can build. That permit is going to go through a level 1 anyway. So, whether we got to keep it at that level 1 for everything, or we say, well, if this is for a new, a site that is large and it's zoned commercial and you're likely going to build something commercial, so it's likely going to go to Development Commission at a level 3 or 4, or something that's a 3 or 4 or higher. Would those be the ones that might warrant, public noticing? So we could look at that.
Yeah, and I think that, like, if it's just a single-family homeowner, I don't believe, at least me saying that, it would warrant that level 2. But like you said, if it's a large commercial
right,
developer.
And to be able to provide the predictability to any builder to know, here's what I can build, depending on what their due diligence is going to be. If it's very limited, they're larger projects, they'll likely wrap everything into one thing. But if a property owner is looking to sell and they want to know what they have on their property, they can market it appropriately. So, and do they need a public notice sign for that when we're going to be evaluating it and discussing it when a larger permit comes in?
Exactly. And can they do these studies by themselves, per se?
They would need to be done by a qualified professional for, you know, whatever it is, geotechnical, wetland or stream, and then it would be peer reviewed. So the fully baked project, when it comes in, it's been provided by a qualified professional. It's been peer reviewed by our consulting biologist or geotech engineer. And then we have a clean recommendation of it meets the criteria because it went through this process.
No, I think what I'm saying is that can they bring on their own consultant per se to do the study outside of the process?
Absolutely. And then we do our peer review with our
when it
our
gets to
consultant
that
when
point.
it comes to us, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is it's just, it's an opportunity for people to find out more about what they have without triggering public notices and all these things. So I'm going to say I'm for level 1 for the technical reports. Who would like to go? Oh, Commissioner Milligan.
Yeah, I'm going to go for number 1 too, but I want to put on the record, the staff is already responding to a comment I had in my email about qualified, which is under definitions, and we do need to talk about definitions. I don't think it's going to happen tonight. No. But one of them is that the stormwater professional doesn't seem to have the specified criteria that the others do, even though stormwater is such a huge issue. I was seeking a stronger, as long as we have strong qualifications in the qualification definitions, I can go for level 1.
I heard a second. Yays or nays, who is for level 1 review for technical documents? Okay, that is almost unanimous, but that is one off from being unanimous. So that is a clear majority. All right, let's move along to policy question number 5, I believe.
So we did this one, utility exemptions, and then this is the master site plan. So the questions here were major versus minor, the 10% threshold that we've kind of clarified from substantial change, just defining what is substantial is 10%. And then the second one is, should we add a sentence about phasing is allowed for properties over 15 acres? I think the second one's really not a policy question. I think we can make that edit. But really, major versus minor, if you think the 10% is okay, or?
Commissioner Lewis.
I think with the 10%, when I read it, it didn't feel, I know this is going to sound silly, it didn't feel super defined to me, right? Even though 10% is a number, because the site can vary what that 10% is. What I was wondering is if we were able to have like a threshold number, 10% of a property up into this size, rather than a blanket 10% for anything.
It's not 10% for anything. I'm trying to try and find that section here real quickly. I think it's under site development.
I mean, the same way that we talk about like, different, the 4,000 square feet building for level 1 up to 10,000 square feet for level 2. I wondered if we would have a table of a percentage depending on the size of the square feet. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's actually getting at 10% of the building square footage or height.
Right, so is it the structure? Is it the property? Is it the amount of impervious surface?
It's all of those.
Right. So then, again, 10% could be a pretty big number. That didn't feel so minor to me.
So let me share my screen again here. So this is under the site development permit, and amendments to site development permits is where it gets to it. And this is for anything that's site development or previously approved master site plans. I don't know if you all can read it. Do you want me to make it bigger? So minor amendments are defined as changes in the amount of open space of 10% or less changes to impervious surface of 10% or less, project densities, buffers, setbacks of 10% or less, and building addition that adds 10% or less of the existing square footage, changes to the height, size, or location of the building or other improvements, and some minor changes as determined by the director. So it's specific things, but then a major is changes to parking greater than 10%, changes to facades greater than 10%, adds more than 10% to the square footage, inconsistent with the design guidelines and such. So it's not broad, and, you know, I think it took the same criteria that was in the existing code and changed the word substantial to, say, 10%, or, you know, it defined what substantial meant.
So that can be on a site that is greater than 10,000 square feet.
So we're talking just about previously approved master site plans. Those were larger projects.
Right, so the amendment, so are the, again, so we're on page 103. All these 10% are not subject to a sliding scale of the size.
Of the site.
Of the site.
No, it's what was approved. So if you had, like the example I gave, 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, hypothetically, then adding another 100, 99 would be minor. Anything more than 99, 100 would be major.
Commissioner Milligan.
Remind me, so this is just to amend the permit, and the amendment must still come in compliance with the code.
Correct.
This is not an exception, it's
Correct.
just a change. Thank you.
It's just the process to approve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that it's to scale. So, Commissioner Esamwede.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, to scale. This is a master site plan as opposed to a specific design within that master site plan per se. Because typically, if we say 10% is the threshold, when you get to the design stage, 10% of 100 acres, and I would believe that the threshold would be lower than that, just from an environmental impact if you're adding impervious areas. So I think the clarification there is that this is a master site plan. So since it's more so essentially on a desk per se, updating that plan related to that 10% threshold per se, it should be okay, as opposed to later on when you move forward into design, then that threshold, that there's a different code and threshold, essentially.
Yeah, we can look at some language edits here, you know, changes in the amount of open space of 10% or less, or previously approved, you know, we can look at maybe clarifying if it's adding confusion, so.
Yeah.
Thank you, I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in. I think that would be super helpful, sorry, Chair. I think that would be super helpful, because right now, again, I have a scalability issue, the way that it's written right now, because again, 10% can be significant for a lot of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Everyone's been so well behaved, so it's getting late. So I know we're trying to barrel towards the end, but still answering very important and pertinent questions. I think it's safe to say maybe we get some language, Minnie, to that effect, and it comes back. I personally don't have a problem with the number. To me, it's to scale, to Commissioner Milligan's point, but I don't think there's any harm in seeing what you guys can come up with to tighten that language to Commissioner Lewis's concern. Anybody have any exceptions to that? Okay, a lot of head shaking no. So let's move on to question 7.
Yeah, question 7, we really don't have anything for you to debate or discuss on this thing. I just highlighted this because this came as a public comment about changes to the non-conforming section. So as you read through this, if you have anything that you'd like us to bring to your attention, we can, but there were no policy changes made to this section. It is rearranged and it kind of walks you through different sections, but it's the grandfathered clauses are in here. If you already, don't meet the code, then what are your bookends? You can do maintenance and all of those kind of things, but if you go beyond that, then when do you have to bring it into compliance? But I think there was some public comments made about some policy changes being made over here, so we just wanted to kind of, so I'm not sure if there's anything we're looking specifically from you all on this?
Well, I do appreciate your clarification earlier this evening, so I think that works for me, and I believe the particular public comment, I didn't realize they were sitting on an aquifer, so. Does anyone have anything to add about number 7? Okay. I believe we have one more.
And then the last one is really the definition of redevelopment we define is addition, alteration, repair. It doesn't distinguish interior or exterior and has a 50% threshold. And then when we have our site development permit thresholds, we say new development or redevelopment. So just wanted, to be very clear that if you're doing interior improvements, we don't necessarily want you to go through a site development permit exercise because you're not changing anything on the outside. So if you all agree, then we can fine tune the language to reflect that.
Any questions as far as, any comments as far as question 8? Commissioner Lewis.
So I was recalling a discussion with our dear departed Lucy about this when we were still here, just not with us. Am I the only one who misses her? And I remembered us talking specifically about these assessed values of trying to determine this, and we had a pretty at-length discussion about it. What I was confused about was where we landed as far as saying that we didn't have a better mode than the county giving the assessment. It was going to be too technical and onerous for us to do anything else, even though we recognized that this was a shortfall. And is that where we basically landed, was this was better than the worst alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, the alternative of that is you hire an assessor who gives you, market assessment, and then you argue with them about whether they got it right or wrong.
Right.
And so this is the quickest and easiest way to do it, but it doesn't work for all properties. If you are a property that pays no taxes, it's a, 503, whatever the case may be, then you have to go down that path of determining what the assessed market value is.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Asamwede.
When you talk of interior remodeling, it's just based on essentially just within the walls. There's no structural pieces or anything that's touched.
Good point. So interior, a lot of cities will have exterior, you're not exceeding more than 10% of the exterior valuation for your exterior. So they separate out interior from your exterior dollar value that you're spending. So if you're doing a facelift on your building, the new tenants have changed and you're redoing it, they'll make you go through a design review process if it's more than 10% of the assessed value. We don't have a design review here. We have a site development permit, which is really looking at building, not just the building and site design, but, other things. But the reason why this one came into, and these comments came into play, where we have an architectural manual for Central Issaquah, which says you have these 5 architectural styles that you have to comply with. And it was a problem for some of the properties because, Bohm's Candy and Gilman Village and all those are unique treasures adopted by council as unique treasures. But to fit them into one of these 5 styles so we've added that where they don't have to go through this exercise to prove how they comply with one of those 5 styles. So that's where it started with, but I think then the question still is left is to any property that is doing remodels is 50%. Do we need to distinguish between interior and exterior? If you're doing anything to the outside of your building, you automatically, what is that threshold? So we could split it that way to say interior, you're not subject to site development. If you're doing the exterior and you're adding more than 50% to the value of the building, then you are, or whatever that threshold is, 25%. Something like that.
Okay, no, thanks for clarifying.
Commissioner Altamore.
So this is same footprint, only interior that we would be discussing, and so, and this is just site development. All other permitting, if they're putting outlets in all over the place or
Correct.
changing plumbing, et cetera, all of that would still be in play.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think that one is pretty clear. If you
Yeah.
were just doing your inside work, I don't think we want to process a site development permit because nothing on the outside is changing. Where the lines kind of get blurry is you're doing something to the outside, but most of your 50% threshold is because you're upgrading on the inside. And then the separate, at what point do we want people to go to site development permit for small exterior changes? It's still a little bit of a gap, I think. So we can come back with, if you all agree, interior, no site development permit. Exterior changes, we come up with a threshold, then we can propose some language.
So let's find out. Commissioner Lewis?
I think this is moving in the right direction from where we've had this discussion over the last, like 2 years. And it would be great for us to get I don't think we're going to able to have a qualified opinion right now about what that is. And so being able to give us examples of options, I think will help us being able to visualize a footprint and being able to give us square footage. And it makes a lot more sense that way than abstractly in words. Thank you.
Will do.
I guess the only thing I would ask is everybody ready to say an up or down as far as the interior of the house? I'm sorry, interior of yes, yeah, I apologize. Right, but it would still it'd still come under all the other, occupancy, all those other things that would still have to be checked off. So it's really about not changing the footprint of the project itself, landscaping, anything like that. So for me, are we ready to say that tonight? I'm getting nods, so I'm just gonna go ahead and ask so we can at least give staff a little bit more direction. As far as the interior, does everyone have a problem that no threshold, it's not?
No site development permit for interior remodels.
Okay, so who's in agreement with that?
Thank you.
And then I guess if we can get some different options for the exterior, that would be helpful.
We will do that.
Excellent. Do we have any more
That
policy questions?
concludes everything. Thank you so much for sticking with it. I know it's late in the hour, and it's a lot of information, and we're making you meet every week, so can't thank you enough for all you're doing, and, appreciate
Thank you, Minnie.
a lot of time spent reading very dry code, so.
We did have 2 months off, so we had some gas in the tank. So that concludes our regular business for this evening. I'd like to ask staff if you have any city council updates that you'd like to provide us.
Nothing new. I think we talked about last week.
Okay. All right. Any other business or announcements from staff?
Nothing new to report.
All right, Stephen?
Unless Stephen?
We have Christian and council here, so anything? Well, I'll make sure we dot our i's and cross our t's. Well, I do want to thank everyone tonight. I do want to thank everybody that joined us for bearing with us through the technical issues we had earlier this morning. I want to thank staff. I want to thank our fantastic commission for bearing with us. We did have a little bit of a late start. Try not to think about what time you would have been getting out, but different thing. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Tonight, we are going to adjourn at 9:50. So have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.